Ahoy there, friends. Hopefully you're doing well on this wonderful Sunday, Easter Sunday as it so happens to be. As I mentioned in my community post, I'm not feeling my best. Patience and I caught something. I'm going to blame Walmart. It may not have been Walmart, but who knows. I got over my sinus infection with my antibiotics, and then we went to Walmart to pick up regular medication that I take daily, and then I got sick. I was starting to feel it on the first. I wasn't feeling as bad, but it's kind of progressively gotten worse over the week. I'm actually feeling better today than I have been, but I am going to go ahead and take a break. I'm going to take a few days off, just do some compilations here. I'm going to do different types of compilations. So I'm not going to do just regular, here's a bunch of stories for you to enjoy. I kind of want to do some of my favorite stories this week. So today's episode is a collection of some of my favorite paranormal stories. Now, this is not all-encompassing. This is not all of my favorite stories. This is just 30 ones that I was looking through my list. I'm like, that was a good one. I like that one. Let's include it. So hopefully you all enjoy this collection of 30 scary paranormal stories. Some of my favorites, some of the creepiest ones. Not all of them creepy. Some of them are more lighthearted or heartwarming, if you will. At least one or two of them is, I think. My brain's not all here, so... hopefully you enjoy them. And until next time, my friends, which will be tomorrow, which will be glitch stories, which I will also do a glitch video of some of my favorites, just because some people have asked for that too. So anyways, enjoy the stories. See you soon. And yeah, bye. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to your podcasts for a year now, and I love them all. My story isn't scary per se, but it's definitely paranormal or spiritual, depending on how you look at it. I'll start my story off in the summer of 1985. It was August, and I was 12 years old. My parents and I had just moved to Edmonton, Alberta the summer before, and my dad hadn't been feeling well for a couple of weeks. We knew it had to be something serious because my dad never got sick. And after seeing a doctor, he was admitted to the hospital for a week. It turned out, he was a type 1 diabetic, and it was bad enough that he had to be hospitalized in order to stabilize his blood sugars and teach him how to take insulin by injection and manage his diet. He had just turned 42 that July, and had always been active and healthy, except he was always a little overweight for most of his life. So, fast forward to November of 1986, and my dad was doing great. He lost some weight, was managing his diets, and taking his insulin. And then he decided that he didn't need to take his insulin anymore. Now, my dad was the kind of man that never complained about being sick, and used to say that doctors were like mechanics. They only fix you up enough so that you have to keep coming back. My mom was upset that he was being stubborn, and it worried her a lot. Then, the following April, on the 7th, it was like any other morning. My dad was up early, making breakfast for everyone while I got ready for school. He drove me to school that day, gave me a kiss goodbye, and told me to have a good day. I was 14 now and in grade 8, but that afternoon changed everything. My cousin, Glennis, showed up at the school just after lunch was over, and I was called to the office. My cousin told me I had to come with her to the hospital because my dad wasn't doing well. We raced to the hospital and met up with my mom outside of the ICU. She explained that my dad said he wasn't feeling well that afternoon, and he was going to hop in the shower and then go see his doctor. But before his shower was done, he called out to my mom while wrapping himself in a towel to call 911 because he suddenly couldn't breathe, and then suddenly collapsed to the floor. The ambulance managed to stabilize him on the route to the hospital, but he was now in a coma and hooked up to many different machines. Needless to say, he passed away from kidney failure 2 days later due to not taking his insulin for the last 5 months. My mom was devastated, and I was angry. How could he do that to himself and to us? It took me a long time to get over that anger because he was so young and I was a daddy's girl. Over the next few weeks, my mom and I experienced some strange occurrences after his passing. The first one was on the evening after his funeral. All of his siblings and his mom, my grandmother, flew down from Ontario 2 days before. Everyone was gathered at our place that evening in the dining room and the kitchen, while I was laying on our love seat in the living room. My Auntie Fern showed up, my dad's first cousin, and she was all about wanting to take charge of putting all the cash gifts and checks from family and friends into a trust fund for my mom and I. My dad never trusted her when it came to money, and some of the family were trying to step in and stop her from discussing any of that with my mom, while she was in no shape to make any important decisions at that time. Suddenly, in the living room, the curtains that hung in front of our patio door blew out like they were hit with a gust of wind, as if the patio was open, but it wasn't. Then, all the cups in the cupboards started to rattle. Everyone stopped talking and looked at each other as my grandmother walked over to the cupboards, opened them, and proceeded to separate all the glasses and coffee cups until they were silent. But once she closed the cupboards, they started to rattle again. My Auntie Fern looked very uncomfortable and left a few minutes later. As soon as she walked out, the door and the rattling stopped. The next incident happened 2 weeks later, when I came home from school. My mom always got home from work an hour after me, so when I went inside, I noticed our storage room door down the hall was open and the light was on. I thought my mom must have forgotten to turn the lights off and close the door earlier that day. So, I walked down the hall to the storage room, reached in to pull the chain which turned the light off, and then closed the door. I walked to our kitchen and picked up our house phone and called my friend Michelle to chat while I made myself a snack. As I was talking to Michelle, I happened to glance down the hall and the storage room door was open, and the light was on again. I quickly explained to my friend how I just dealt with that when I got home, and how it's like I never did. I was a little freaked out because I knew I closed the door and turned the light off. So I put down the phone and told Michelle I would be right back, while I went to deal with that again. Once I was back on the phone, I told Michelle what freaks me out is that my dad was putting up new shelves in the storage room the week he ended up in the hospital, and he still had one set of shelves left that he didn't get to assemble for it. Then, my heart felt like it was going to jump out of my chest when I glanced down the hall and saw the door open and the light on again. So instead of dealing with it again, I let my friend go and went straight out to the patio to wait for my mom to get home. When she pulled up 15 minutes later, she asked why I was sitting outside. I explained the whole storage room situation and told her that I had just left it when I saw it for the third time. But when we walked in and looked down the hall, the storage room door was closed, and the light was off. My mom looked at me a little skeptical, but didn't question it any further. The third incident happened 2 months after my dad passed away. I was sound asleep when I opened my eyes, and I saw a faint glow in my room. Looking around to see what was causing it, I saw the image of my dad at the foot of my bed. It was like looking at etched glass with a faint light in it. I could see everything behind him, but I could also make out the baby blue color of the suit that he wore for his funeral. He didn't move or say anything, but being 14, I pulled my covers over my head in fear and told myself that I was just dreaming. A couple of minutes later, I peeked out again to still see him standing there. Now, I felt really scared. Not of my dad, but the thought of my dad as a ghost. I pulled the covers over my head again and noticed through my covers that the room got brighter. As I peeked out a second time, there was now a bright orb at the foot of my bed, and it was shining different colors. Then, it slowly moved toward the ceiling and disappeared. I quickly jumped out of bed and ran to my mom's room. Without explaining anything, I just climbed in beside her and noticed that she was awake but had tears on her cheeks. It wasn't until a few years later that she asked me why I crawled into bed with her that night, as I hadn't done that since I was a little girl. Then, before answering her, I asked her why she had been crying that night. And she awkwardly told me that she awoke to see my dad standing in her bedroom doorway. Then he blew her a kiss and disappeared. Then I shared why I had crawled into bed with her. She told me that she felt that he had come to say goodbye to both of us. As the years went by, I got married on my dad's birthday, July 23rd, because he couldn't be there to walk me down the aisle. And I also had 3 daughters whom I shared photos and stories with of my father. So, even though they never had the privilege to meet him, through my mom and I, they felt that they knew him. My mom always told everyone that he was the love of her life, and she would still shed a tear now and then because she missed him still. Then, around the end of November of 2012, my mom was in hospice. She was diagnosed with cancer 8 years prior, and I took care of her until October of 2012. Once it spread throughout her entire body, hospice seemed the best place for her to be. The staff were very loving and caring, and I was there around the clock with my own cot in her room. I only went home once a week to wash the clothes that I packed for the week, and replaced a week worths of new ones. Whenever I did this, my oldest daughter would come and spend time with her and stay the night on the cot in her room until I returned the next day. When I did this on November 20th and returned home the next day, my daughter stayed the day with us before going home. An hour after she had left, she started sending me text messages, asking me what I see and sending me a picture. The hair stood up on my neck as I saw the image of what looked like my dad's face on her dining room window. Kayla lived on the 4th floor of her apartment building, and she had a balcony only in her living room. This image was on her dining room window. She noticed it as soon as she walked in the door and thought that it had to be a smudge or fingerprints from her little girl that just happened to look like my dad. But when she went to rub it, she realized it was on the outside of the window. So, with her heart racing, she took a picture of it and sent it to me. As I'm looking at it, my mom happens to ask me who I'm texting with, and I said Kayla. Then she giggled and said that she just left from here and asked if everything was okay. So I said that she sent me a picture, so my mom asked what, and asked if she could see it. Without saying what it was, I just handed her my phone. My mom got the biggest smile on her face as she said, "Dad's here. He's sending a sign to let you all know that he'll be around and waiting for me, and that everything is going to be okay." An hour after Kayla sent me that photo, the image disappeared. My mom passed away on the early morning of December 5th with family at her side. To this day, I still have the photo with that image on Kayla's window. I cherish it because I do believe he was trying to get our attention that day, and it worked. Take care, Raven, and thank you for sharing my story. I have a story that isn't creepy by my standards, and I'm a 14-year-old boy who finds most stuff creepy, but is definitely mind-boggling. Last year, on Friday the 13th, my school had this event afterwards that we do a few times during the year, which they call fun nights. Although this night was not going to be fun afterwards. I was having a few of my friends over for a sleepover afterwards, and we were ready to get all sugared up and stay up super late. But when we got back to my house, the usual route we took was barricaded off. I could see some flashing blue and red lights at the corner of my block. We were a block away from my house, so I could see the corner. But at the time, I didn't think much of it, because we get so much activity here that I was kind of used to it by now. I had one friend who hadn't gone to the fun night, so he had his dad drive him to my house. I called him because he had texted me that he was there. We weren't quite there yet, because we had to go around the block to get to my street. When my friend picked up, I had asked him what was going on and said it looked like something happened with a bus or something. When we pulled up to my house, we all got out of the car and looked at the corner. When we talked to some of my neighbors, it sounded like someone got ran over by a bus. We kept watching until I realized that they were cleaning blood up off of the street. My neighbor down the street texted me asking if I was okay, because she had seen the person was roughly my size and was riding a scooter that looked a little bit like mine. I had told her that I was fine and that I would talk to her later. When I told my friends about what she had told me, my friend, let's just call him H, looked like he was about to puke. When me and my friends asked him what was wrong, he just looked up and said, "My brother rides his scooter all over town." I had met his brother a few times, and I thought he was a really cool guy. And yes, I could confirm that he rode his scooter all over. His brother was a year older than us, but we still had fun hanging out with him. When H got a call from his dad, his fears were confirmed. It was his brother. We waited with him until his dad came to pick him up. When he finally did, he had talked to my parents quickly. When they came back in, they sat me down in the dining room and had told me that he had died on arrival. That's the first time I ever cried in front of my friends, but it certainly wasn't the last. Now, I'm not a religious person, but if a friend needed me to, I would pray for them, and that's what we did. The rest of the night, we decided not to mourn, but to celebrate his life by having the most fun that we could that night. We did all the things we were planning on doing that night, and it was amazing. Now, yes, I know what you're thinking. This isn't supernatural at all, but I'm not quite done. That night, when everyone else was asleep, my friend, let's call this one C, told me that all he had wanted to do was talk to him one more time, referring to H's brother. I had told him that that would be the best, and then we went to sleep. The next morning, my friend had told me that he had talked to him. I was surprised at first, but I've always been a strong believer in the paranormal and all that. I asked him what they talked about. He said that he didn't remember exactly what they had talked about, but that it was a nice conversation. I was a little jealous at first that he got to talk to him, but I knew that my friend was the perfect person for H's brother to talk to. Plus, I wasn't ready to say goodbye yet. That would come later. I really hope you enjoyed the story, Raven, as I've been wanting to share it ever since I started listening to your podcast on Spotify about 3 weeks ago. And keep doing a great job. Thank you. When I was around 9, I had this stuffed penguin. It wasn't one of those cute, soft, and fluffy ones you see everywhere, no. This thing was almost as tall as I was at the time. This thing was big, over 3 feet tall, with glossy black eyes, and a strange, almost rigid body. My uncle had given it to me for my birthday a couple of years prior, and I remember the minute that I saw it, I hated it. There was something off about it. Something that made me feel uneasy. Like it was watching me when I wasn't paying attention. I loved my uncle. He was a great guy, and he meant well, but I have no idea why he bought that thing. I was polite about it, and he was excited to see me with this giant stuffed bird, so I smiled and said thanks. It ended up in my room, of course, perched in the corner near my bed, and as much as I tried to ignore it, I would lie there every night convinced that it was watching me. Eventually, I asked my mom if we could move it somewhere else in the house, and she finally agreed, saying that we could move it into the spare bedroom, which was right across the hall from my room. It was far enough, though, and I was just happy that it was out of my room whatsoever. That's the setup to the story. I promise, it is going somewhere. It was a year later, when I was 10, and I had my friend Evan staying the night. It was late summer and a big storm had rolled in. It was a cooler night though, so my mom wanted to keep the windows cracked in the living room so we wouldn't have to run the AC. It was one of those summer storms where everything was going crazy. The wind was hitting the house, the trees were smacking the windows. Basically, it was going to be one of those nights where Evan and I tried to scare the crap out of each other. We were telling each other creepy ghost stories in my room after everyone had gone to bed, just trying to make up anything and everything we could that would be scary, which wasn't much since we were 10 years old. I had just finished telling a story that I made up or read about in a book or something about a clown that would watch kids sleep through the window, when out of nowhere, Evan asked me if I still had that creepy, giant penguin thing. Evan, being my best friend, knew that thing scared the hell out of me, so of course he would bring it up. I hadn't thought about it in a while, but the second he mentioned it, I started thinking about it again, and I got that chill down my spine. I tried to sound calm and say, "Oh, yeah, it's in the spare room now. I didn't want it in my room anymore." Evan then said, "We should go check it out." I immediately tried to say no, that I wasn't supposed to leave my room after bedtime like that, which was a total lie, and I'm sure Evan knew it. But Evan kept pushing me, saying that I was a baby, and that I was letting a stuffed penguin scare me. I relented because I wasn't going to let him think that. I grabbed my flashlight, and we opened my door and slightly down the hall to go to the door to the spare bedroom. I stood there for a moment just thinking about that stupid penguin. Evan pushed in front of me and grabbed the door, pushing it open for me, basically giving me no alternative. I stepped into the room behind him and shined the flashlight back and forth, looking for the penguin. Of course, it was there, in the corner, just lying there face down on the spare bed. Evan laughed at me, saying that it was a stupid thing that I was so scared of a stuffed penguin. I gave a slight chuckle and agreed with him, just saying, "Yeah, it's just a dumb toy." This is where things went weird. When I said that, I swear to you that the room dropped a solid 10 degrees. It went from slightly cooler to freezing in there in an instant. I turned back toward Evan to ask if he was cold too, and the door behind him started creaking and then shut hard, like someone had pushed it. It wasn't me. I was standing there staring at Evan, and I knew it wasn't him because I was literally looking right at him. I stared at the door with my mouth slightly open, just freaking out, when Evan hit me on the shoulder and told me to look, pointing in the direction of the bed. When I turned that way and shined the light on the bed, I saw the penguin. Only this time, it wasn't lying flat. It was standing up and leaning against the back corner of the bed. That was more than enough for me. I ran from where I was standing to the door and yanked it open, running as fast as I could across the hallway back to my bedroom. Evan yelled out for me to not leave him there and stumbled out of the room towards mine. When we got back to my room, I flicked on the light and was surprised to see that Evan actually had tears on his face. I asked if he was okay, and he told me that he was fine, and then wiped them away, and asked what was wrong with that stupid penguin. I said that I hated that damn thing, that it was always creepy to me, and I hated having it in my room, and that's why it was over in there. And now I had even more reason to hate it. It was such a quick event, but it was probably the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced as a child. Neither of us spoke about it after that, and I didn't go back into that spare bedroom at all. Like, ever. My mom still lives in that house, and to this day, I still refuse to go in there, even though that penguin is long gone. I personally think that the penguin was cursed, or haunted, or had something attached to it. I don't know. That was the only time I ever had a paranormal experience, and it didn't start until I called the thing stupid. I actually asked my uncle where he got it, but he honestly could not remember. He knew that he didn't buy it from a big store or anything, but he couldn't recall where exactly it had come from. I don't know, and now I don't really care. I'm just glad that I never had a run-in with whatever it was that was attached to that stupid penguin ever again. Hello, Raven. I originally found you on YouTube and was so happy to discover that you have a podcast since I listen to them at work. I love your content. Thank you. So, anyway, this happened to me and my boyfriend at the time, about 8 years ago. We decided to take a trip to Estes Park, Colorado one winter. We rented a cozy little cabin for a few days. The first night we were in there, we settled in at the cabin and went to dinner at a quiet restaurant with a huge window looking out at a dark, woodsy area while the snow fell. It was beautiful, but kind of spooky, if that makes sense. We continued on to the famous and haunted Stanley Hotel that was Stephen King's inspiration for the book The Shining. We had booked a couple of tickets for the latest ghost tour that night, about 10 p.m., I believe. We went all over the hotel, while the tour guide told stories about the hotel and described a lot of the haunting experiences people had had. I was an avid picture taker at this point, and I brought my camera everywhere. I was snapping picture after picture. I'll describe some of these photos later. After the tour, we went back to the cabin and sat in the bed watching a little TV before we went to sleep. I closed the bedroom door because I always do that. Not sure why. But since I was a teenager, I've always closed my bedroom door when it's time to sleep. I fell asleep almost immediately while my boyfriend sat up watching TV for a while. Soon after falling asleep, I woke up to knocking. I sat up in bed and looked towards the bedroom door. The knocking was on the bedroom door. I know it was, because the door was getting hit so hard that it was shaking in the frame with each knock. I was so out of it and still half asleep, so I simply said, "Someone's knocking at the door." My boyfriend called out, "Hello? Who's there?" But the knocking just continued, shaking the door. It probably only lasted for about 20 seconds, but it felt so much longer. I lay down and went back to sleep like nothing weird had happened. In the morning, I woke up and this memory immediately came back to me. Since I was half asleep, I asked my boyfriend for confirmation. "Hey, did someone knock on our bedroom door last night?" And he had a horrified look on his face and said, "Yeah, the door was literally shaking in the frame." I asked him what he did. He said, "Well, you were half asleep and seemed completely unconcerned, and I was freaked out, so I just ignored it and eventually fell asleep." The logical thing to do was to check the doors, so I got up and checked the front door. It was locked. I checked the sliding glass back door, and it was also locked. No one could have gotten in last night, and nothing was stolen or moved or anything. I told him, Well, if it happens again tonight and I'm sleeping, wake me up so I can investigate. He said, investigate? You mean open the door? And then I said yes. He then continued, and let it in? I laughed and said, sorry to burst your bubble, Jesse, but if it's a ghost, it won't be held by the confines of that door anyway. It didn't happen again the next 2 nights that we stayed there, and when I got home, I finally decided to go through the photos that I took at the haunted hotel. I was shocked to see orbs everywhere. Not tiny ones that could be dust or bugs, but large ones. There were ones that were green and appeared to glow. They were perfect circles, with the edge glowing the brightest and the middle was slightly transparent. They were invisible to the naked eye. At one point during the tour, I took a photo of my boyfriend, and this one freaked me out the most. He was surrounded by glowing orbs. Some just specks, some were large, glowing ones about the size of my fist, and one was half the size of his head. My camera would autofocus and never had any issues. However, in this photo, the orbs, although invisible to the naked eye, were so prominent that the camera focused on the orbs, which were crystal clear, and my boyfriend was fuzzy and out of focus. I think that I still have these photos on one of my many memory cards and photo CDs, and when I have some time, I'm going to go through them. If I can find them, I'll add them to this post. I honestly think that something followed us from the haunted Stanley Hotel back to our cabin that night. I wish I had fully woken up and gotten up to see what was going on. I'll never know what truly happened, but I will never forget what happened that night. Hey Raven, I wanted to start by saying that I love the stories that you tell, especially the paranormal and glitch ones. I actually have a haunting story about the house that my dad and stepmom live in that I've wanted to send you for a bit now, but just haven't had the chance. It's not really relevant, but it does help explain some things. I'm 17 and my parents are divorced. Me and my sister spend every other weekend and all summer at my dad's house. And I have to say that house is seriously haunted. I have a few experiences that I could share, quite a few actually, but here are just a couple of the ones that I think are the most interesting. One of the first events to mention, and is actually something that has happened more than once, is the weirdness with the front door security camera. We have a camera that's mounted and that watches the front door on the inside. And in part of the frame, you can actually see down into the basement area, specifically a door to what is the laundry room. More than once, one of us has been watching the camera and seen someone else in the family walking out of the room and to the right. With how the camera is positioned, you can't see the full person but can see part of their head and shoulder for a second or two. The first time it happened, I had taken my sister and brother to get lunch. We walked to the McDonald's down the street. We'd been out for a little bit, finishing up our food, when my dad called me. I answered, and he asked me what my sister was doing in the laundry room. I looked at her and laughed and said that we weren't even home, that we'd gone out to get lunch, and then asked her if she had gone into the laundry room at all today. My dad cut me off and said, "No, just now. I just now watched her on the camera and she walked into the laundry room." I once again reiterated that we hadn't been home for about half an hour, and that she said she hadn't been in there. After a bit of confused back and forth, he told me that he was going to head home and that, if we got there before he did, to not go inside. I think that he was thinking it was an intruder or something, but when we all got there and he walked through, there was no one there. The doors were all locked and there was nothing out of place. He showed us on the footage from the app that there was absolutely someone that looked like my sister walking into the laundry room. But something felt off about it. Like it wasn't solid, if that makes sense. This actually happened several more times last summer, but it wasn't just my sister. I saw my dad and stepmom walk in at different times. He saw me walking out of the room. My stepmom saw my dad. It was crazy that it happened so many times, and each time it was impossible for any of us to have actually gone into that room. In the end, we chalked it up to some kind of spirit that just liked to appear as people in the house. It seemed to never do anything malicious. It just kind of randomly appeared and walked into the laundry room as random people in the family. The other thing that happens frequently is the strange voices that we all hear from time to time. I have no idea if these are connected to the mimic spirit in the basement, but it would make sense since it seems to copy those of us that are here. On several occasions, we've all heard someone else in the family talking nearby when the person is nowhere near us. The first time it happened, I was 14, and it was actually my stepmom that experienced it. She was in her room, sorting out laundry, when she heard me screaming. Like, in pain or completely terrified screaming. She threw the clothes down and ran into the living room hollering for me, and then shouted to my dad asking where I was. He reminded her that I was on a mission trip with the church that weekend, and asked what was wrong. She explained what she heard, and he told her that he didn't hear it. And after just kind of looking around the house and asking my siblings, my stepmom decided that she was just hearing things. Then, literally the next day, it was around 2 in the morning, and my dad said that he was having major trouble sleeping. Like, he was having some serious insomnia and hadn't fallen asleep. He decided to get up and go watch some TV in the living room to see if he could finally fall asleep. And the second he walked into the living room, he said that he heard me screaming for help. In a panic, he ran to my room and threw the door open, but then remembered that I still wasn't home. He told my stepmom about it, and they both kind of just kept quiet about it, thinking that it would scare us kids. After that, I had a similar experience with hearing my dad calling for me when he wasn't home, my sister crying while she was asleep in her bedroom, and I've heard my little brother outside talking to me when he was down in the basement playing the PlayStation. Again, I don't know if this is related to the other spirit, but it very well could be. And if so, I would say that this activity is a bit more malicious than just showing up on the camera. So that's my experience. And overall, I know that it isn't incredibly terrifying, but it's scary for those of us that stay there. And obviously my dad, stepmom, and younger brother who live there full time. It's been less and less over the last couple years, but when it was happening, it was pretty frequent. I'm curious if any of your listeners have anything similar to this, but if not, then hopefully they can get a bit of chill from my story, at the very least. To start, I'm 31 and male. The first event happens around 15 years ago. My grandpa had kind of an old-timey gangster vibe. Nice suit, fedoras, clean cut. I was super interested in history as a kid. Grandpa was a Navy World War II vet, so me and him got along really well. We used to hang out for hours reading or watching World War II history and building models. My parents named me after him, and I've just always felt close to him. He passed away when I was around 15. It hurt my dad and I pretty bad. I have 5 siblings that didn't seem to care much about it, but it was crushing for my dad and I. So, we really built a bond through it all. So, one day my dad brings home a bunch of my grandpa's old clothes. He was a pretty wealthy guy and had a ton of really nice clothes. My dad lays piles and piles of clothes on his bed, telling me that I can look through them and have whatever I want. We hang out for a bit, looking at them, and then he leaves to go get more stuff. I'm trying on different suits, looking at myself in the big mirror in my parents' bathroom. Eventually, I put on one that just kind of feels different. Dark brown tweed, brass trims. I found it in this old canvas bag. It's big, but I felt really cool. I get the pants, vest, and jacket on and walk into the bathroom. Getting adjusted while standing in front of the mirror, I look down at the hat for a second, and then look back at the mirror. Time feels like it totally stands still. I'm looking at myself in the mirror, but it's not me. I know that I'm in my parents' bathroom looking at myself in the mirror, but it's not my reflection. It's my grandpa looking back at me in the mirror. I've never seen a picture of him when he was young, but I knew that it was him. It felt a little eerie at first, almost like I was trapped or being watched. Then, I felt this kind of brushing pressure on my chest, like someone was wiping dirt off the lapels of the suit. I felt this wave of calm come over me. I felt like he was there with me, straightening the suit up to make sure that I look good. I couldn't help but just stare at the reflection. I don't know how to explain it, but it just felt really nice. Then, it was just gone. I felt shocked for a moment and then just really sad and couldn't fight the tears from coming. I found out eventually from my grandma that he had bought that suit as a present to himself when he started his business after he got out of the Navy. Apparently, he hadn't worn it for years until he had it tailored to wear to my baptism. To her memory, he put it in a canvas bag after, and she hadn't seen him wear it since. I felt it again on my wedding day. Getting adjusted in the mirror, being nervous, I felt that pressure on my chest again. Just a gentle sense of calm. It felt like he was there with me. Was wearing a different suit, but I still felt it. I didn't need that shot of whiskey I was about to take, and went on to have one of the best days of my life. I still have it. It didn't fit me until I was in my mid-20s, and I've had it tailored a few times now, but I wear it whenever I get the chance. Hey everybody. I was randomly suggested this subreddit by a Reddit notification, and after reading a couple of posts and realizing there was a popular shadow person tag here, I thought I would share my own experience from when I was a child, with the entity that I've called the Shadow Girl for as long as I can remember. It should be said that I'm 19, male, now, and all three of the events I'm about to describe happened when I was pretty young, from around 6 to 8. When I was younger and my parents were still married, it was me, my one older brother, my 2 younger sisters, and my parents, obviously. My dad is in a very high post-secondary educational position, which he got when we were young in Winnipeg, where I still live now. As he was in the process of getting this position, we lived half the time in Winnipeg as we looked for a place to live there, and half the time in a house across the US border in Pembina. We eventually got a house in Winnipeg, and we slowly moved into that house from the Pembina house over some period of time. I don't really remember how long, but it isn't important. The first encounter. I was in the 2nd grade when I saw her at our newer house. I had come home from school and very soon after, decided that I wanted to play Minecraft on our family tablet, which was kept charging in my parents' room on the 2nd floor of our house. I ran up our curved staircase and turned right immediately through the doorway of my parents' room. As I entered and stood to face my parents' bed, the tablet directly across the room from the foot of their bed, I saw her. I stood completely in shock. The pitch-black silhouette of a young girl in a puffy dress was sitting on the foot of my parents' bed and staring straight forward at the wall ahead of her. I didn't know what to do, but I felt paralyzed as I watched her. She ever so slowly turned her head to look at me with these saucer-like white eyes, just an absence of black on her face, where instead was white, and those were her eyes. I slowly leaned out of my parents' doorway after a couple of seconds of eye contact and yelled downstairs, "Dad? Dad?" But nothing back. And so as I peeked into the room, she was gone. Just gone. I was afraid, and so I stepped carefully, but still retrieved the tablet and scurried downstairs as if something were nipping at my ankles. Pembina is a small town now, and it was even smaller when I was young. In our house, which we called the Little House, or the Pembina House, there was a very creepy basement, a main floor and a second floor. My brother and I shared the room on the second floor, as did my sisters, and my parents slept in a room on the main floor. Now, the second encounter, I don't remember the context for why I was going to my room or anything, or how far apart this was from the first encounter. But I rounded a corner to enter the stairwell, and I remember distinctly I was looking at my feet on the first 2 steps. I then looked up the stairs and froze as I saw her at the top of the stairs. Again, just staring at me. I don't know what had gotten into me at this time, but I was annoyed enough at this thing for showing up that I went up the stairs at a full sprint to try to catch her. I watched as her whole body just turned without lifting her legs, and walked so slowly around the corner and up the stairs which led to the second floor just past the corner. I made it to the top, and surprise, surprise, she was nowhere. I looked in every room upstairs, and nothing. She had disappeared again. And then the last encounter. This happened at our Pembina house. I was a very outdoorsy kid and loved catching bugs and collecting rocks and building forts and everything. It was awesome. In our backyard, and I had caught a butterfly with a glass from our kitchen and decided that the best place to store it was in my sister's closet, under a glass, with a single branch. My logic was that it would be safe and not be found or stolen by anyone since my sisters didn't use their closet. I slid a piece of paper under the glass to seal the butterfly in, and I remember that the paper had a drawing I had done of the iron robot from that animated kids movie of the same name. Very crudely drawn, but I remember that fun detail. Anyway, the next day I went back, up the stairs to the second floor, into my sister's closet, and to my surprise, discovered a very dead butterfly. I was very sad, and I looked out my sister's window at that moment, and immediately caught her gaze. She was standing far out in our yard, very far, but she was looking up at me through the window. I put down the butterfly and slowly walked to the window, not breaking eye contact. After about a minute of her staring, she once again turned without moving her legs and almost floated off to the side, out of view behind a hedge. To this day, I have no explanation further than her being a shadow person, and I was first introduced to that revelation in the 6th grade, when I was reading a Haunted Canada book which had a story detailing a shadow person. I hope people don't think that I'm just making things up, as I tried to include every detail I could remember. To this day, I'm still scared that she's watching sometimes, but it's just paranoia, I'm sure, since I haven't seen her since then. Anyways, if people liked this, I have a lot more ghost encounters that my whole family has experienced after my parents' divorce, which I'd be happy to share. And have a great day, and thank you for reading. Hey Raven. Your viewers seemed to like hearing about my night walks and sleepwalking experience, so I thought I would share something a little more recent. I posted some of this to Reddit a while back, but I figured that you and your viewers would like to hear it as well. My boyfriend and I moved into this apartment 6 years ago. and it's probably the strangest place that I've ever lived, even including the incidents in my childhood, which I'll submit at another date. It's also a block away from a really famous cemetery. In the first year that we lived here, we had this shadow, about cat-sized, that would dart back and forth between our room and the spare bedroom. The doors of those two rooms face each other, and the bathroom door is between those two doors, if anyone wants to know. So we would just see this tiny shadow figure dash past the lit bathroom multiple times a day or night. Then, one day I was getting ready to store some stuff in the spare bedroom. I turned on the light and was shocked to see a young man laying on the bed. We made eye contact, and he just vanished. Like blinked out of existence, vanished. After that, the shadow never came back. The second year had quite a few events, which I can only attribute to ghosts or shadow people. For instance, I walked into our room and saw the shadow of a person cross the wall like they walked past our bedroom window. Except our apartment is on the second floor, with nothing but dead air outside our window. No one could have been walking there. And that summer, my boyfriend went out of town, so I decided to shampoo the carpets and had moved all the furniture into the kitchen, with the only lamp in the apartment all the way in the back and not plugged in, of course, because it wouldn't need to be used, and I would have to climb over everything to get to it anyways. I had some snacks in the bedroom in case I got hungry. I didn't finish the carpet cleaning until about 1 a.m. Thankfully, I texted the neighbors about it and had permission to take as long as I needed. Exhausted, I took a shower, shut off all the lights, and climbed into bed. I woke up at 8 a.m. to my bedside lamp, it's one of those desk lamps with the arm and all, inches from my face, and pointed directly at me. This was before we replaced all the bulbs with LEDs, so not only was it bright, but it was extremely hot. I moved it out of the way and got up to find that every single light in the house was on. Even the lamp that I couldn't reach had been plugged in and turned on. I shut off the lights that I could reach and then went to my sister's for a couple of days. When I came back, the lamp was off, but still mysteriously plugged in the same socket as the fridge. I moved the furniture back and things seemed normal for a while. That winter, though, my boyfriend and I were woken up by a flashing light. We got out of bed to investigate and found that my bicycle light was turning itself on and off in the spare bedroom. Thinking it was malfunctioning, I took the batteries out and put it back on the bicycle. We got back in bed and the spare room started flashing again. This time it was the room light, and the bicycle light that didn't even have a battery. Annoyed, I said, "Knock it off." Got out of bed and took the bulbs out of both, and then shoved them in a drawer. The next day, I put the bulbs back in, but the bicycle light wouldn't even turn on. The button wouldn't even click, so I just threw it away. The third and fourth year kind of blend together. We had some neighbors who were really loud and always negative. It seemed to attract things to our apartment. We would have nightmares most nights, and wake up hearing something inhuman cackling about it. My boyfriend and I agree that this was some form of dream demon. I woke up one morning to voices in the room, sat up, and realized it was a green ring of lights in the closet speaking. And my boyfriend was saying the exact same thing that it was at the exact same time. I don't remember everything they said, but I do remember that it rhymed. The bit that I do remember is, "We the spirits of earth and sky come to this world to die." Then, the last event that year was, once again, while my boyfriend was out of town. I woke up feeling like I wasn't alone in the room, so I sat up and looked around. I saw a hand coming out from under the sheets and resting on my pillow in between me and the wall. I sleep on the wall side of the bed. I grabbed the hand, instinctually, I guess, and I watched the blankets move like something slithered down them and under the bed. The hand vanished, and I heard a voice say, "Huh?" in a what the hell kind of tone. Having had enough, I pulled the blankets over my head, ignored the rustling sounds coming from under the bed, and just went back to sleep. Nothing happened the 5th year that we lived here, but this year we had my nephew staying in the spare room for a couple of months. When he moved out, he left the room an absolute mess. And my boyfriend and I spent a few hours cleaning it, and had to throw away most of the bedding. We also keep the litter boxes in that room, so my boyfriend cleaned them. We use these bags for the waste that are big enough for a small trash can, but are as sturdy as those black yard bags people use for leaves in the fall. Both litter boxes fill one of those pretty much all the way. My boyfriend set the bag down next to the front door, went to get the trash from under the kitchen sink to take them both out at the same time, and when he got to the door, the litter bag was gone. He asked me if I moved it. I hadn't. We spent an hour looking for it, thinking maybe we'd misremembered. I don't know if that was the ghost helping us out or if it was a glitch, but that bag of waste has not reappeared. And for those who might think that he took it out and forgot, our dumpster is half a block away, and my boyfriend was only out of my sight for less than a minute. Not enough time for him to have taken it out. And I checked the front step to see if he'd put it there as well. So, yeah. This apartment is really strange. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to let you all know. Hello, Raven. I've been a listener for years now, often playing your episodes on repeat at work or the gym. I love your cryptid collections and anything you cover on creepy things in the woods. I know you run this by yourself, so keep up the amazing work. Thank you for that. My story is not of the cryptid variety, but a paranormal encounter, and it's stuck with me since childhood. I'm nearly 28 now. I grew up in a small lakeside town in eastern Michigan. Friendly, easygoing, and full of happy people in old neighborhoods. Growing up, I lived in my dad's old childhood home, which his family had moved into in the early 1950s. It's a small white house, very quaint, with 2 little bedrooms, a large attic that served as a 3rd bedroom, a little living room, and a standard kitchen. Eventually, after having 2 kids, my sister, Mallory, who's 6 years older than me, and myself, my parents had an addition put onto the back of the house to include a dining room, family room, and a second full bathroom to accommodate the increase in family size. Perhaps creepy things were already happening before I was old enough to realize them, but my earliest memory of the happenings in that house is when my sister, in her preteens at the time, started to complain about a shadow man she kept seeing around the house. Mallory's bedroom was in the attic, and she recanted a memory of coming down the stairs in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The attic stairs led down to the living room, which opens into a narrow hallway with a bathroom and 2 doorways at the end facing each other, my room and my parents'. As Mallory cautiously eased her way through the dark living room and passed by my parents' open bedroom door, she did a double take. And standing behind my dad's side of the bed was the unmistakable form of a very tall man with a hat. Not the Hat Man per se. No glowing red eyes or trench coat. And my sister didn't struggle with any of the conditions people who see the Hat Man do, like sleep paralysis. She saw the form of a man, average build, standing over my parents while they soundly slept. Upon telling the story, Mallory mentioned that she felt no sense of fear, dread, or really any negative emotion. She remembered feeling surprised by this, and instead felt a steady sense of calm and even safety. She made her way back upstairs and went back to sleep with no issue. After telling the story to my parents, they laughed and said, "Oh, that's Robert. He's been here for as long as we can remember," as if it were the most natural and obvious explanation. Being about 6 or 7 at the time, I was freaked out, and not at all okay with this so-called Robert entity in our house. My parents assured me that he had never caused any harm and that he was just watching over us. Over time, Mallory and I grew to be okay with this, despite my initial reaction. Good thing, too, because Robert was very active. He creaked floors, appeared in dark corners, that identifiable hat always perched on his head. Once, he even proved his good nature by moving a panhandle off of a burner right in front of me, my sister, and my mom. My mom had been cooking dinner and without thinking left a metal panhandle over a stove burner that was set on high. Had she gone to grab it, it would have severely burned her hand and caused major damage. The three of us watched with our own eyes as that pan did a full 180-degree turn on the stove, moving the handle to a cool burner so it wouldn't burn my mom. She said a big, "Thank you, Robert," and we all chuckled at his kindness. Still, something was always off. Even knowing how benevolent Robert had proven to be, I still didn't want to run into him. I could never get up to go to the bathroom at night, despite my parents being right across the hall from my room with an open door. I would wake up, have that awful sensation on the hair of the back of my neck sticking up, too afraid of what was on either side of my bed if I turned my head. Because the thought that was always in the back of my head was, what if it wasn't Robert that was causing these feelings of dread? What if there was something else in this house that Robert was protecting us from? Besides hot pans, of course. I hated being left alone and would often sprint from room to room as I turned lights off behind me to make sure I never got caught in the dark. As I got older, and could be left unattended, I dreaded the rare moments that I was left home alone, especially as evenings set in. I couldn't stand to be in the addition of our house alone, as it was the largest area of our home and had the most hiding spaces. The basement was also off limits, being a dark, dank, terrifying storage unit of towering boxes and strange shadows. At any moment, I was sure that something other than Robert would appear. One school night when I was around 12 years old, my sister was at volleyball practice, my dad was at work, as he had transitioned to night shifts at the time, and my mom was finishing dinner while I sat at the dining room table to do homework. Our neighbor, Jane, called out of the blue to ask my mom if she'd be willing to dog sit unexpectedly, as she'd been called into work. My mom agreed, hung up, looked at me, saying, "I'm just gonna run across the street to talk to Jane and get everything for her dog. I'll be back in a little while, okay?" I'm sure that she saw me hesitate as she added, "It'll just be for a little while, and your sister will be home soon." I stared, large-eyed and terrified, as she walked out the door and across the street. I sat at the table and continued to do homework, telling myself, it's only for a little while, right? Nothing bad can happen in just a little while. I repeated this to myself as I wrote my essay, and eventually the distraction of work took over and calmed me down from my state of distress. It had probably been about 20 minutes at this point, and I assumed that my mom got stuck talking to Jane in a classic Midwestern goodbye. Another while passed, and I heard a sound. The unmistakable creak of a door near the landing that went down to the basement. I was startled at first, almost ready to panic, but then I remembered that Mallory was due home from volleyball at any minute. I heard the groan of the floor by the doorway and footsteps jostling down the basement stairs, accompanied by a giggling and a soft voice that sounded exactly like Mallory's saying, "Come on, come over here." Still calm based on my assumption that Mallory was home, I called out, "You know I hate the basement, Mallory. Just come back upstairs and sit down." Again, that voice called out, Come here. Come here." "Cut it out," I said again, more irritated now at my sister. But no one responded. That's weird, I thought. She's literally just around the corner. She should have heard me. I got up, walking across the kitchen to the basement stairs by our side door, where Mallory had just come in. I peered down the basement steps, but it was dark and no one was there. At least, not that I could see. As a feeling of dread came into my stomach, the door next to me suddenly opened, causing me to scream out. There was Mallory, home from volleyball, and my mom right behind her with Jane's golden retriever, Rhea. The three of them cascaded in the door, asking me what I was doing. I burst into tears, grabbing Mallory's shirt and demanding to know where she had just been. "I just got home, what are you talking about?" Mallory said, obviously concerned. My mom chimed in. "Sweetie, Mallory just got out of the car and met me in the driveway before I came in. No one has been here except for you for 30 minutes. I heard someone giggling and running on the stairs," I cried. "They told me to come down there with them, and I assumed it was Mallory playing a joke." I was seriously freaking out. I mean, there had never been voices before, and there had never been children's footsteps running around or luring someone to come with them. My sister and mom didn't seem to know what to do about this, as they hadn't heard it themselves. They didn't necessarily dismiss me, but they said that it must have been Robert. No matter how much I explained that it definitely was not Robert, no one seemed to care. Maybe they were already too desensitized to paranormal activity, or they just knew that I was the biggest scaredy cat of the family. We sat down for dinner and carried on with the evening, me on edge the whole time. That night, after dinner, Rhea, the neighbor's dog, was sitting in the living room with us when she started growling and scratching at the floor. This section of the living room was situated right above the main storage area of the basement, where the voice and footsteps had led and were trying to lead me. "Rhea, what's wrong, girl?" my mom asked, but her growling soon turned to snarling as she continued to dig at the living room carpet in a frenzy, pacing the room back and forth in between scratches and barks. This freaked out my mom enough to look at me and say, "I'm checking the basement," and she immediately went to the stairs, turned on the lights, and brought a flashlight for the areas that always seemed dark. After a few moments of Mallory and me cowering on the stair landing holding a still whimpering Rhea, and waiting for my mom to return, she came back up looking relieved. "Well, there's nothing down there. I was worried a little bit that maybe someone had broken in and was in our basement, but all clear, we're okay." But it didn't feel okay. Later that night, Mallory and I went onto the family computer. Yes, this was back when you had one desktop computer for the whole family. And we looked up information like hearing children's voices, and children's voices luring me somewhere. And sure enough, we found multiple articles and websites talking about how a demonic presence will often mimic or create a doppelganger of someone you know and trust to entice you to come closer to them. There are various beliefs and myths about spirits that mimic the living for nefarious purposes, and many stories about spirits who exist to protect innocent people from these entities. Like Robert, I said to Mallory, as we continued to read about what we can only describe as a mimic demon. Nothing like this has ever happened again, and with time, Robert's presence also dissipated. Eventually, we moved out of that house, but still owned it. My dad was letting my aunt live there full time. I haven't been inside in years, but anytime I was, I always felt that lingering sense of being watched or pursued in some way. If that was a mimic, what was it trying to lure me into? What intent did it have? Is it still there? Did Robert protect me while I was home alone from something sinister? Whatever it was, and whatever its intent, to the mimic residing in my childhood home, I hope that we never meet again. So, I don't know exactly how to start this, but it has been an event that has stuck with me since I was a child. I'm 20 years old now. I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, around 10, 12 years old at the oldest. Anyways, I was having a sleepover with two of my friends at the time. Let's call them S and T. We were staying the night at S's house, since they had a house unlike T and I who lived in the same apartment complex. For some reason, our barely preteen brains thought it would be a great idea to go down to our elementary school at around 11 p.m. I really don't know why S's mom let us kids go down there without an adult, but it wasn't even a mile away, and I was a kid and thought that she was cool for letting us go. It was a typical Washington night. Barely any stars to see from the light pollution, mushy grass from the rain never being soaked up all the way, and the dark-hilled forest reminding at least me that anyone could be in the woods watching us. We made our way up to the school from the back parking lot, and through the field next to the forest since it was a straight shot from the house. In all honesty, when we first arrived and were messing around on the playset, I didn't sense anything wrong. When we started playing on the slide, I got a cold feeling in my gut. I looked around us, and I couldn't see anyone in the school windows, in the field, or approaching us. A couple of minutes go by, and T and I get bored with the slide, but S stays. So T and I go to try and practice our tricks on the bars. Not like the monkey bars, we always called them gymnastic bars, but they were a long line of bars that peaked at about 8 to 10 feet at the tallest. T wasn't as tall or as practiced as me, so she wanted to use the lowest bar to the far right, at the edge of the playground. I helped her for a couple of minutes with her flips before I started spacing out and staring at the edge of the playground. I call it an edge since it was about 1.5 foot wooden border that kept all the cedar chips from spilling onto the basketball court. As I was staring, my entire body went cold before I could fully resolve what my eyes were seeing. I couldn't really see it, but my brain was trying to see it as a person that was hunched, sitting on the border, faced away from us. It was almost like a darker than black mass that resembled a person with a hoodie on. There was a head shape, but not really a neck. As I stared, I kept getting more frightened because I was sure this was not a person. I couldn't see any texture to the clothes. I just couldn't truly see them. I don't even know how to explain it right, but it was like a void. It wasn't that dark out. Yes, it was nighttime, but it wasn't like the total darkness of a closed closet. But this thing was just the absence of everything. Like it was swallowing the light that would illuminate it. I finally snapped out of it and tried to get T's attention. I lightly smacked her arm a couple of times. T, stop, please. She was confused as she was facing me and couldn't see what had me paler than I already was. I didn't know what to say, and rapidly pointed over her shoulder. When she looked, I saw her stiffen. I was almost relieved that she was wearing the look that I was. I guess I gathered a couple of brain cells at this point, and told T to turn on the flashlight on their phone. Thankfully, she listened, but when she shined it on this thing, it didn't make a damn difference. It still looked like the same empty mass. I was already starting to panic when I realized it really wasn't a trick of the light, but then, to my terror, this thing turned to look at me. It freaking looked at me, with no eyes, no face, just an impression. I could feel it looking at me. I didn't know what it was going to do, but I really didn't want to find out, so I yanked T so hard away from this thing. If I was thinking, I would have apologized, but I just wanted to get away from this thing and for us to be back home. T eventually got the message, so We started sprinting towards the slide, and I started yelling at S. "We need to go. Get down. I'm not joking. Get off the freaking slide. We need to get home now." As I'm yelling at S, they didn't seem to hear the panic in my voice and pulled the little kid, "But I don't want to go." I've had it at this point, and I start to reconsider my friend in the back of my mind, but being the responsible one, but not the adult of the group, I grab S's ankle and start pulling them down the slide. It didn't take much since it was a losing battle for them. I don't know if they really understood what was happening at this point, since T started explaining that there was a man over there, probably a, quote, tweaker. I knew in my heart that it was not a person. I've dealt with the paranormal before, and I wasn't about to let this thing follow us. Eventually, I got a hold of T and S and started booking it out of there. It wasn't the easiest, with S having a death wish and wanted to go back to see it, and T having a medical condition in their legs that made it a lot harder to run fast with the limited mobility, with a sprinkle of asthma and no inhaler to top it off. I was gonna drag them back by their collars if I had to. I was determined to let that thing just go back where it came from and leave us be. We made it back safe. Maybe a little uneasy for the night, but we told S's mom. It really didn't spook her per se, since she was a self-proclaimed witch and ex-goth that liked all things weird and supernatural. She believed it, but was miffed that her own kid wasn't being safe, especially with her kid living in a haunted house herself. I know that sounds crazy, but at least 3 of their relatives died in the house, and we had plenty of paranormal encounters in that house to at least respect the idea that we were not alone. In the end, we didn't experience that thing again, thank God. I've seen some things, but I really didn't want to deal with something that struck so much cardinal fear in me so quickly. Everything about it just seemed wrong, like it didn't fit where it was. As I've gotten older, I've stopped trying to rationalize it, more of just understood that not everything in this world is understood. And you just kind of got to roll with the punches. Hi, Raven. Over the last month, I've come to the realization that there is a mimic living in my home. The first incident was about a month ago. I was in the living room early one morning looking for a lost remote control. For some reason, the remote controls in my house always end up lost and then found in weird places. My 23-year-old daughter occasionally spends the night with me, and this morning she had spent the night prior and was still sleeping, so I thought. As I was looking for the lost remote, I heard my daughter say, "Hey, Mama?" in a sleepy tone as if she was about to ask me something. I replied, "Yes?" and waited a few seconds and didn't get a reply. I said, "Maya? What is it?" Again, no reply. Confused, I walked into the bedroom that she usually sleeps in, and she wasn't there. I looked around the house and she was not in the house anywhere, so I called her phone. When she answered, I asked her where she went, and she told me that she had gone to work early. I was confused because I clearly heard my daughter in the house just minutes earlier asking for me. I didn't tell her what happened because I felt that she would just say I'm probably hearing things, but I know beyond a doubt that I heard my daughter in the house. A week later, my fiancé and I are standing in the hallway in front of the full-size mirror, and I'm trimming up his beard, when we both heard my son walk out of his room into the kitchen and say, "Mama?" in a worried type of tone, as if he was about to tell me something concerning. I looked over and said, "What is it, Hunter?" And no one was there. I was so shocked and confused, I stood silently and just stared at my fiancé as he softly said, "You didn't imagine it, because I heard it too." We both walked into my son's room and knocked on his door. He said, "Come in." I asked my son if he had just walked into the hallway and asked for me, and he said that he had not left his room at all. He was playing a video game the entire time. So, who was just in the kitchen hallway asking for me? It remains a mystery. A few days after that, my daughter thought that she heard me in the bathroom. She texted my phone and asked if I was going to be much longer in the bathroom because she wanted to shower before bed. I told her that I wasn't in the bathroom. Her reply was, "I literally just heard you, Mom." She said that she knocked on the door and asked how much longer I was going to be, and supposedly I replied, "Just a second." She said that she heard me mumbling something and then it got quiet, so after waiting outside the bathroom for a few minutes, she texted me. I was never in the bathroom, and when she opened the door, it was empty. She swears that she heard me in the bathroom, though, and I believe her. Up until this point, I had not told my daughter about the experiences we had prior. The scary part is when I told her what had been happening, she said the same thing had been happening to her. She would hear her 3-year-old son, my grandson, playing, laughing and asking for her, and when she would reply, no one would be there. She said she thought that she was losing her mind and decided not to say anything for fear that people would think that she was hearing things and wouldn't believe her. Well, I definitely believe her, because as of this day, I hear echoes of people's voices while I'm talking to them before they can even reply. I hear my dog barking in the distance while he is literally right beside me, not making a sound. My fiancé claims that something has been tickling the bottom of his feet at night while he's sleeping. I heard my 3-year-old grandson running through the hallway toward my room and saw his shadow making his way to my room before it stopped and completely vanished. My grandson wasn't there. He was asleep in his bed. Does anyone know what this could be? I feel that it's a mimic, but it's now touching us at night. I've tried cleansing my home with herbs and different methods of purifying the energy in the house. I've even set out protection wards. So far, it remains unknown whether this thing is planning on staying for a while or moving out of my house. Hey guys, I hope this is the right place for this. I'm a 30-year-old male, and I'd like to start off by saying that I don't really believe in this type of thing, or at least, I didn't before. Some people in my family have always thought the paranormal to be real and claimed to have experiences, but until recently I've always chucked it up to their imaginations. Odd things have happened throughout my life, but I think I've always just shrugged it off and applied some sort of logic to it. Things like, this house is just really old and makes noise. But I can't logically come up with a reason as to why certain things are happening anymore. I guess everything started around Thanksgiving of 2017. After about 25 years in the same house, my family, mom, grandparents, aunt, and I decided to abandon the family home and move out of state. We immediately regretted the decision and quickly moved back to Georgia, into a new 3-bedroom home. I took the entire basement as a bedroom, set up a hammock, and settled in quickly. After a few nights in the new place, I stopped having dreams. It seemed like no matter how much rest I got, it was just never enough. Apparently this was happening to the rest of the family as well, but we never really spoke about it. A few more weeks go by, and then my mother started losing weight out of nowhere. My grandparents' health started to decline, and my aunt began shutting herself in her room. By the end of the first year, my grandma, who only went from her bed to her chair, somehow broke her back from just sitting, but had bruises all over her back. My mom had lost somewhere around 60 pounds. My aunt had pretty much went crazy, and my grandpa grew really irritable. It wasn't much longer after that my aunt disappeared and got admitted into a, excuse my choice of words, nut house. Once she got out, she just refused to come back and moved out. Around this time, I started having nightmares. Around October of 2019, those nightmares got so bad that I hadn't had a full night's rest in several weeks. Then, one night, each time I woke up, I felt paralyzed and numb. It was like somehow all of my limbs were numb and cold. Then, one night this happened, I saw a figure. I was a nervous wreck for a few days after that. I remember telling one of my coworkers, and they told me to sage and pray over the house. I remember looking that sort of thing up to understand the whole point of it, and I was skeptical, but I did it anyway one night while my family was out. I walked every room of the house, upstairs and down. I even went into the bathrooms. I burned sage and prayed for what seemed like easily an hour or two. Later that evening, my family came home and were none the wiser. However, that night was different. It was quiet, peaceful. I remember it so perfectly because I think that was the first time since we moved in that I had managed to sleep comfortably. Unfortunately, the next morning, everyone else in the house had gotten extremely sick. My grandpa and I were the only ones who weren't admitted into the hospital that day. Luckily enough, everyone recovered, and things were fine for a couple of months. Then, before the pandemic went into full swing, 3 other family members moved into the house with us, and took over the living room. Great aunt and second cousins. With them came several dogs, who were always playful and calm. Then, for who knows why, stuff started happening again. Mom started to lose weight again. Grandma and Grandpa's health went downhill, and I started having nightmares again. The other 3 family members began to bicker and argue like I had never heard from them, and their dogs started barking at all hours of the night. This continued on for months, and the situation just kept getting worse. Everyone was growing irritable and miserable. Eventually, those extra family members moved out, and I began spending less time at the house, even though we were going through a pandemic. I met my now wife and moved out rather quickly with her. My family stayed in that house, though, and I just visited on the weekends. A few months later, my mom had lost well over 140 pounds, but the doctor said she was healthy. Also, during this time, my grandma's health had gotten so bad that she was admitted into a nursing/physical therapy facility. She spent about 3 to 4 months there before coming home. During that time, I had gotten married, and sadly, a week later, my grandma had passed away. And that was in the beginning of summer in 2021. That left my mom and grandpa in the house. I can't really speak on if they had any weird occurrences between that time and now, because I didn't live there anymore. They never spoke about those kinds of things, and when I visited, I never brought it up or asked questions. I didn't see the point or make any weird connections. That was until recently. Sadly, my grandpa passed in February of 2023. Since then, my mom has finally moved in with my sister and is taking her time getting her stuff from the house. Well, it's been about 3 weeks since the funeral, and as of today, I think I'm terrified. I don't know what to think or do other than sit here and draw connections to strange things that have happened the last few years. Heck, that's why I'm here sharing all this information. Last Thursday, I was driving home from work at roughly 3:10 p.m. I was passing by the old house my mom was moving out of, and I saw someone I didn't recognize from a distance. The road was maybe a football field away from the house, so it was hard to tell who it was. Once I got home, had dinner, and spent time with my family, I called my mom and asked her what she had moved out that day. Apparently, she hadn't been there at all that day, and started freaking out thinking someone was trying to steal from the house. She, my sister, and some of my sister's friends went up there to check out the place. Later that night, my mom called me back to tell me what had happened. She said that no doors or windows had been broken, but the doggy door cover was ripped off, and the house had some strange, nasty cologne-like smell all throughout. While they were there, none of them felt safe, but they searched the house to see if anyone was there, and found no one. My sister apparently got tired of looking around, so she went into the pantry to find that all of the snacks and drinks were missing. Apparently a huge fuss was made, and they thought someone had broken in just to steal food, until my sister and her friends heard some strange sounds. Then, eventually, they heard a voice telling them to get out. This scared the crap out of them, and they went outside immediately. They were freaking out and yelling at my mother to get out too, claiming there was a ghost. But my mom didn't hear anything, thought they were being dramatic, and started poking fun at them. She even began talking, cursing, and threatening the quote-unquote ghost, all throughout the house to prove a point. I guess this was a bad idea. Something scared my mother so bad that she just kind of shut down and refused to explain. After we got off the phone, I told my wife about it and laughed a little. I honestly thought that they were just hearing things. But then something happened today. I got off work early, and I went by the old house, alone. I wanted to get some tools that I left in the garage, but I never made it. You see, I pulled into the driveway, got out of the car, and felt something weird. Once I got to a breezeway door, before I could even reach for the doorknob, I felt like how I used to feel in the middle of the night, numb and paralyzed. I also felt empty, like I had been hollowed out. Then I felt a lot of pressure, like I was carrying a really heavy weight. I got scared, so scared that I started trembling. My first instinct was to get back into my car, so I ran to it and I left. I pulled into a nearby gas station, but by this time I was a nervous wreck. It took me nearly an hour to calm down. Once I did, I went in and got me something to drink and some gas. And for some reason, I got the bright idea to go back. The second time I pulled into the driveway and parked my car, I grabbed my gun out of the glove box and went to go into the house once again. But it was the same thing all over. But the feeling was so much worse. I couldn't see anything, but something was there. It felt giant and threatening. That presence was so overwhelming, overpowering, and just outright awful. Even with my gun in hand, I turned and ran back to the car. This time I nearly wrecked on the way out of the driveway. I was headed home, but instead I went to a friend's place. I didn't tell her anything about what was going on, just that I needed her to come see something with me. I felt like she would understand better than me. The reason I went to her was because she comes from a Haitian family, whose roots run deep. She doesn't practice voodoo, but knows about it and has several family members who swear by it and live that lifestyle. But she's also one of those energy and vibe type people. She knew something was wrong with me, and was worried because I wouldn't explain, but she came with me anyway. As soon as I pulled into the driveway of that old home, she began to cry and freak out. I hadn't told her anything, and she loved my family, so there was no reason for her to act that way. She started yelling at me to leave, so I did. As I was driving back to her place, she started yelling at me and punching me in the shoulder over and over. She was angry at me, but eventually she calmed down and we started to talk. She told me to never bring her back to a place like that again. I asked her what she meant, and she said, "A place that has an evil spirit." I asked her a bunch of questions and apologized before dropping her off. I got home maybe 3 or 4 hours ago. I originally came online to research stuff, somehow ended up on this forum, and just thought I should share. Truth be told, I really hope this is just mine and my family's minds playing tricks on us. Maybe we're just grief-stricken. We might just all be a little crazy. But through all of this, the one thing I know that is real is that terrifying sense of fear that I felt today. And it definitely has my nerves shook. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to you for the last 6 months, and I'm really grateful for your podcast. I've perused the subreddit a lot, but haven't posted until now. A lot of paranormal and supernatural stuff has happened my whole life, but none has really stuck out to me like this one. For context, my family has a lot of people who can sense spirits, or have had similar experiences. It sounds strange, but on both sides of my family, I have had relatives who are intensely superstitious, or very in touch with their spiritual side, if that makes sense. My brother and I have had strange experiences for our whole lives, but perhaps we're just observant or perceptive to weird things. This one seemed different to me, though. 2 months ago, my grandmother passed away at around 3 a.m. She lived in Georgia, and I live in Massachusetts, 1,000 miles away. I haven't talked to her in years because she had dementia and was not very lucid most of the time. Her health had seriously declined, and she was essentially on hospice care at my uncle and aunt's house, where she lived. The night that she passed, I was watching The X-Files. I've watched the show since I was a kid, but I really only watched and rewatched seasons 1 through 6, because that's what we owned on DVD. Even since I've gotten older and have had access to multiple streaming services where I could watch the rest of the series, I just never did. I've basically rewatched the series at least 2 to 3 times, and have watched some episodes more than 10 times, just to put it into perspective. Anyways, for some reason, a few months ago, I decided to continue the series from season 7 on. This may have a spoiler, so if you're planning on watching the show, don't read it. I think it's been enough time to allow spoilers. However, the episode that I watched that night was about someone dying, but it was very melancholy and somewhat hopeful. I believe it was season 7, episode 17. Without giving much away, this episode has an intense focus on collective unconscious and souls, and is super existential. What was weird was that I never stayed up that late watching TV, and this night I stayed up past 2 or 3 just to finish this episode, one that I had never seen before. I remember feeling strange after watching it. Kind of sad, but also peaceful. Exhausted, since it was hours past my usual bedtime, I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a missed call from my dad. I already knew what he would say when I called him back. Once he picked up, he said that it was the call. The one everyone is anxiously waiting for when someone is on their deathbed, and said that she had passed at around 3 a.m. that night. Perhaps it is just coincidental, but I can't help but think how weird it is that I happened to stay up that late that night. That I happened to decide to continue watching a series randomly one day, and that the last episode I watched before going to bed, around the same time my grandmother passed, was a very emotional one about the fear of losing someone you love. But let me know what you think. When I was around the age of 6, my mom started to clean our church every week to help out. During this time, we were renting a farmhouse where me and my 2 older brothers experienced quite a few paranormal events. But my parents never gave it the light of day, due to them being Christian and very conservative. One day, my mom was cleaning the church and my brothers and I tagged along since my dad was working. While my mom cleaned, we decided to play hide and seek, since the church was empty. Eventually, I was the seeker looking for my brother, and I remember walking down a long hallway. Since the church was closed, and my mom was just cleaning the room where the sermons were held, all of the other lights were off except for the emergency lights. When I was walking in the very dim hall, for some reason, I felt the need to look up. And from that moment, I can't get the image of what I saw out of my head. There was an all-black figure around the size of a 6 or 7-year-old. The figure was crawling on the ceiling, so I was looking at its back. Only it had noticed me, so it had twisted its head all the way around to see me. The face was blurry since it was dark, but I could make out an almost cartoonish smile staring at me. And I remember the eyes being not human-like at all. The weird thing about this is, despite how creepy I remember the figure being, my 6-year-old self was not scared at all. I remember thinking to myself, how did my brother get up there? And then I felt the need to leave the hallway. When I saw its face, I didn't feel my stomach drop, nor did I feel scared or threatened. I just felt like whatever I saw wanted me to just move along. To this day, I don't have any idea what it was. My brothers called me crazy and said, there can't be any demons in a church since it's protected by God. And my parents agreed. The older I get, the more I wonder if it was just a dream that made itself into a memory. It just feels so real when I think about it, and I'm able to describe it in such great detail. I don't really remember any other times we played hide and seek, but this one sticks out. I know that children are more likely to have paranormal experiences, and my brothers also had things happen to them, but it was at the house. Why did I see something at our church? After doing some research, I found out that the church has been around since 1873, and I remember that there is a cemetery on the land as well, with the same name as the church. I'm happy to talk about some of the other things that happened in the house, but I don't remember much. Really only the things that my brothers have told me. The house was very old and in the middle of nowhere. It was an old farmhouse that someone purchased and had renovated. The barn was a no-go zone and gave us all the creeps. The cows on the land also acted very strange, and the house just had this weird vibe overall. It's December 19th. I'm spending the morning listening to your podcast and getting a few things ready for Christmas. It is, as you know, an excellent podcast. Oh, thank you. I'm spending Christmas with my daughter at her home in Sydney. I live in Melbourne, yes, we're in Australia, and I'm spending the morning listening to you and finishing the gifts that I need to pack and take with me. Last week, I had guests staying with me, so when I tidied the house and set up their living space, I put the gifts into a bright, multicolored, and very easy-to-see shopping bag, and put them on the top shelf in the cupboard in my bedroom for safekeeping. This morning I got them out, put them, well, still in the bag on the dining room table, and got 2 of the gifts out to work on. With those two finished, I smiled as I popped them into a plain colored bag, which is my code for this project is complete and ready to be delivered. I took that bag into my bedroom and put it on top of a set of drawers ready to be packed into my suitcase. Then I went back to the dining room to work on the others. But the table was empty. Where was the brightly colored bag? Where were the other gifts? I was sure that I had put everything on the dining table, but it was bare. I checked the chairs. No, not one of them. I looked around the room. I'm home alone. There's no one here that could have moved it. Perhaps I only thought I brought everything out, or had taken both bags into my bedroom. I went back to the bedroom, either to get the missing things from the top of the drawer where I'd accidentally put them, or from the top shelf of the cupboard, but they weren't there. I double-checked the bag on top of the drawers, but it only contained the two completed gifts. I went back to the dining room in case I missed them. I looked around, under all the furniture, in the cupboards and the drawers, but the bags and its contents were nowhere to be found. I walked into the lounge room. I hadn't been in there this morning, had I? Perhaps I had. Another search, around and under and inside all of the furniture. But nothing. I began checking everywhere that I store things. I pulled things out of the hall cupboard, and searched the cupboard in the laundry, checked under the bed in my room, in the box with the other Christmas things in the cupboard and under the beds in the other rooms. Nothing. I began looking in places where I really doubted I would have put them. The cupboard in the bathroom, the pantry, the cupboard where the kitchen things are kept, and even on top of the fridge. I'd had a bit of a clean out before my guests arrived last week. Oh no, perhaps I mixed them up with the things I had donated to charity shop? Surely not. They were in my bright, happy shopping bag. Surely I would have noticed. But I was a bit stressed with the guests coming. They'd only given me a few days' notice. Perhaps I didn't notice that I'd accidentally picked up the bag with the donations. No, I always keep the donations separate from other things, and I double-check them as I take them out to the car. Once, several years ago now, I accidentally donated something that I loved, and raced back to the charity shop the next day in hopes of buying it back, but it wasn't there. It wasn't something I ever wanted to repeat. I'm usually pretty careful when it comes to donations. Could I buy the purchased presents again? Did I have time to remake the handmade things? Where were they? I clearly remembered bringing the bag out when I decided to work on the gifts. Is my mind playing up? Is age finally taking its toll? No, it's the house ghost. I often joke that we have a house ghost. Well, I joke to others about the house ghost, but now I know we have one. Our house is around 70 years old. We bought it 40 years ago from the original owners. No one has died here, but things vanish and reappear, and I blame the house ghost. I believe it's an old friend of mine who died when we were in our 20s, and for some reason, has just decided to stay with me. Happily, he's more of a prankster than malevolent, but sometimes, like this morning, he can be a little annoying. I remember listening to one of your stories about a lost wireless earbud. It made me smile. A few months before I heard that story on the podcast, I had dropped one of my earbuds on the carpet in the lounge room. I saw it fall, saw it land on the carpet. I saw it sitting there right in the middle of the room. I was writing an assignment for university, and I decided to finish writing down my thoughts before I picked it up. But when I went to pick it up, it was gone. I checked the floor, even moved the furniture, but it was nowhere. I saw it fall. I saw it on the carpet, but it was nowhere to be found. Your story made me smile that other ghosts do similar things. I got angry with the house ghost about the earbud. I knew that was a mistake. Always search, give up, accept, ask politely for the thing back, but never get angry. A big mistake. Never get angry. Sadly, the earbud still hasn't reappeared, but I blame myself. Back to the Christmas gifts. I decided to take a break from searching. I told the house ghost I was giving up, congratulated him on his joke, and told him I had other things to go and get on with. I bought a new top at the charity shop yesterday and wanted to alter it. I got the sewing machine out of the hall cupboard, having another quick check through the cupboard for the missing bag. And as I did, I told the house ghost that I knew I'd said I was taking a break, but hey, just in case. I put the sewing machine on the dining table and got to work. Alterations done, I put the sewing machine away, another quick look through the hall cupboard just in case I missed the bag the last 2 times I checked, and went to the laundry to get the vacuum cleaner to clean the threads from the carpet. And yes, another look through the laundry cupboard just in case the bag was actually there and I missed it the last 2 times I checked that cupboard. I looked down the back of the washing machine, even though there's no way the gifts would even fit down there. And inside the washing machine, even though I'd put a load of laundry through that morning. And I even checked inside the dryer. I haven't used the dryer for a while, and you never know, but no, the bag and the gifts weren't hiding in anywhere in the laundry. I walked back into the dining room, and there was the bag, on the dining table, in the middle of the dining table. It was not there when I put up the sewing machine, or when I packed it up to put it away. I would have seen it. It's a small table, and from where the bag was sitting, I would have had to have moved it to set the sewing machine up. I checked the contents. Everything was there. I shook my head. I'd spent over an hour looking for that bag, and my house is tiny, a single story. Not many places to hide a bag, especially one that's bright yellows and pinks and blues, and is pretty hard to miss. There's no way it was on the dining room table, but there it was. I rolled my eyes, thanked the house ghost, picked up the bag and walked into the bedroom to check that the other gift was still on top of the drawers, just in case the house ghost had decided to move them now that he had given the other gifts back, or hide the bright bag again when I left the dining room. The other bag was still where I'd put it. I thanked the house ghost. I'm slightly annoyed by all the wasted time. Did I mention that I'm going to my daughter's house in Sydney for Christmas and I have things to do? I finished all the gifts and put them with the others on the top of the drawers in my bedroom. As I headed back to the dining room, I noticed that my sewing scissors were on the bench in the bathroom. Now, how did they get there? Oh, hang on. I think I know. So, I used to be super skeptical when it came to paranormal or supernatural stuff. A hardened non-believer of anything that wasn't right in front of my eyes on the regular. Obviously, that's not the case anymore, and I have a story to tell you that explains why I changed my perspective. I used to work for a rental company. I was contracted with them as a handyman doing basic fix-it work for their tenants. The company was a realty company that managed a few houses, some apartments, and duplexes. Things like that. It was a great paying job being in a small town and all, and most of the tenants were great people that were just happy to see me. This specific job that I got called on was a minor electrical issue at an old house that they were renting out on the edge of town. It was an older house, 2-story, really nice on the outside. I knocked on the door and an older gentleman greeted me with a bit of a scowl asking what I wanted. When I told him I was there to look at the electrical issue, his whole demeanor changed, and he welcomed me in. He explained that he was having issues with one of the lights in the attic, and that it would flicker every time the lights were on up there, but that he had changed the bulb and it didn't seem to fix the issue. He even said that he put in an LED, thinking that it was an issue with the bulbs. I told him I would go take a look, and then see if I could fix it, or if we needed to get a full-on electrician. I went up to the attic and, sure enough, he was right. There wasn't much room among the boxes, but I got into the attic, set up my stepladder, and checked out the housing where the flickering bulb was. It's not really important to the story, but I did find an issue with one of the wires that was an easy fix. So I got to work splicing and capping. As I was doing so, I heard someone say something behind me. Thinking it was the old man, I shouted back, "Just a moment, I think I actually found the issue." But when I went back to work, I heard it again. This time it was more a whisper than someone speaking regularly. I paused to listen to it, and it seriously sounded like someone was whispering in a different language. It was one dominant voice going on, and it sounded like it was really close to me. It was creepy, but I just shook it off, thinking I was maybe hearing the TV downstairs, or just getting freaked out at the fact that I was standing in a dark, creepy, crammed attic. I finished replacing the wire and screwed the housing back into the ceiling, when I dropped my screwdriver. I reached down to grab it, and when I did, I paused. It occurred to me that the attic wasn't as dark as it should have been. I glanced over and noticed something glowing under an old and dusty sheet. The nosy part of me got the best of the situation, and I was curious as to what it was. So I stepped over and pulled the sheets to the side, only to find an old, big tube TV. It was just on a static screen, because it obviously didn't have an antenna or anything, and I was just kind of amused at seeing a model that old. It was the kind that had the wooden frame around it, the really old ones, which you don't see very often, especially not in the condition that this thing was in. As I was marveling over the TV, a thought clicked in my head. I mentioned a moment ago about how it wasn't as dark as it was supposed to be, because of the TV. And it should have been dark, because the power was off in the attic. I had flipped the breaker. There was no power going to anything up there. And, of course, when I grabbed the power cable on the back of the TV, it wasn't plugged into anything, meaning this TV had no electricity running to it, yet it was showing me a moving, static visual somehow. At that point, I was done. A haunted TV in a dark attic was the start to a horror movie, and I don't really like horror movies, so I went ahead and grabbed my tools and stepped down to flip the breaker back on and see if the light was fixed. It was, thankfully, and I went ahead and went down to tell the owner. He was satisfied, I was terrified but hiding it well, and everything was copacetic. So I told him to have a lovely night, and I left. That's probably the only time I've ever had something creepy happen on a job. And honestly, it might not sound like much, but an unpowered TV clicking on while you're working in a dark attic, it was enough to make me go from skeptic to maybe there is something more to this life. I haven't had any other paranormal encounters, and I'm pretty sure that if I had stuck around in that attic, I probably would have had something happen. Sure, that would have been a slightly more interesting story, but no thank you. Hi Raven. You recently read one of my stories, and I mentioned that I had content that would keep you busy for months. So, I decided to put pen to paper and share another experience. What I'm about to share was 100% not a dream. It was one of the most real things I have ever experienced. This is going a ways back, but fortunately, my childhood friend told me to write my dreams and paranormal experiences down, as I have many of them. She explained that keeping a journal or record of them helps us understand the dreams, messages, themes, and makes better connections or sense of them. I took her advice and started keeping a journal about my dreams and paranormal experiences after the death of my aunt. In March of 2015, my favorite aunt passed away. I was exceptionally close to this aunt, and I took her death very hard. In fact, I grieved her death for several years after. This aunt was an identical twin. Her twin had died in April of 1989 and lived in another country. My twin aunts were very special to me because they raised my father, as my grandmother died when he was a baby. The twins were about 16 years older than my father. Their father, my grandfather, remarried soon after my biological grandmother passed away. The twins' new stepmother was very abusive to my father when he was a baby, and she was very unkind to my twin aunts. The twins soon moved out of the family home and they took my father and raised him. Honestly, I'm forever indebted to the twins and the two other aunts that worked together to raise my father. One of the twin aunts owned a home in the United States. This is the aunt that meant the world to me. Sadly, March of 2015 marked a great loss in my life and left a gaping hole in my life. This story is about her. So, in June of 2017, I went to bed on a Wednesday night, and in the wee hours of the morning on Thursday, around 4:15, I woke up and sat straight up in my bed. Incidentally, I am certain of the dates and times as I referred to a journal entry before writing this. Anyways, upon waking up, I realized my husband was already up and out of bed. He left the house for the gym as he typically does before going to work. I felt his absence on his side of the bed, and suddenly I became wide awake. Normally, I know that his absence from the bed in the wee hours of the morning means he was either downstairs getting ready for his commute and long work day, or he was at the gym. This would not be cause for alarm. In fact, it would be reason for me to roll over onto his side and fall into an even deeper slumber. Not on this day. So, when I slid my hand over to his empty side of the bed, something felt unusual. I didn't know what, though. But I suddenly became wide awake, as if I had had my morning caffeine fix and the jolt following. It was as if I went from a full-on deep sleep state to a full-on awake state with not even a hint of grogginess in between. This is quite rare for me, so it definitely felt strange to say the least. Anyways, I sat up, fully alert, my eyes wide open, and I looked over at the oversized yellow chair in the corner of my bedroom. There, sitting right in my chair, was my aunt, Janine, the aunt that had passed away in 2015. It was as if she was sitting there quietly waiting for me to wake up and see her sitting there. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. I knew in that moment that she was dead, but all I felt was a bit of surprise and ultimately joy to see her again. My aunt was not a ghost. She was not transparent. She looked exactly like herself, only healthier. She was as solid and as real as any person. In fact, she actually looked better than she did before she had died. I'd say she looked as if she had been on a long tropical vacation. Her face was full of life and color. Her skin had a glow that radiated light that isn't something we'd see on living people. I mean, she still looked like an 88-year-old woman, but she looked healthy, vibrant, and overall amazing. Especially with this heavenly glow. Our conversation was telepathic. I asked her what she was doing. We talked telepathically for what seemed like quite a long time. Although I don't remember everything we discussed during our conversation, I clearly remember that she told me that everything that I was concerned about in life, with my kids, and my job, was going to work out great, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. At one point, the conversation took a bit of a negative turn. I began sharing with her that I was still grieving because she was no longer alive. I became sad and teary as I expressed this to her. I told her I missed her very much and I wanted to go with her. She told me no, that I couldn't go with her. Then she stood up and walked out of the bedroom, down the hall, and down the stairs. I watched her slowly disappear right before my eyes. She literally faded right before my eyes. I followed her as she slowly faded, reaching for her. I was trailing behind her essence as she faded down the stairs and into the kitchen. I was audibly crying now and begging her to come back. Suddenly, something told me to go back into my bed and that she would be back, so I did. I ran back upstairs and climbed into my bed, obeying this seed that was planted into my mind. I wanted my aunt to come back and visit me. I felt our conversation wasn't over. As I went up the stairs to return to my bed, I was aware that my kids were still asleep and that my husband was still at the gym. I'm not sure how long I was in bed for because I kept looking over at the clock, knowing that I would have to get up and get ready for work at 5:45 a.m. It couldn't have been very long though. I was awake and I heard a noise coming from the kitchen downstairs. It prompted me to call out to what I assumed was my husband. I thought the noise in the kitchen was him returning from the gym, but it wasn't him. He still had not come back just yet. So, I adjusted my body and tried to get comfortable in hope that my aunt would return. I turned over onto my side, faced the oversized yellow chair in the corner of my bedroom, and pulled the blankets back over me. At that moment, I glanced at the yellow chair and my Aunt Janine was sitting there. She came back, but something was different about her. She had changed her outfit. I know this sounds insane, but she came back with a totally different outfit on. Now, my aunts were some of the most fashionable women I have ever known. In life, they were notorious for changing their outfits 3 or 4 times a day. They were real clothes horses. As my aunt sat there, she was now wearing a cotton button-down shirt that was light-colored. The shirt had a delicate floral print, and this time she had on a pair of shorts, but not too short. I found it strange that she had changed her clothes. After all, she was dead. So even though I thought it was weird, I didn't ask her why she changed her clothes. I guess I was just so glad that she came back. As I sat in my bed and examined her outfit change, I was focused on the texture of her shirt and the print of the fabric of her shirt. It looked familiar. Months after this experience, I reviewed old photographs only to discover the shirt she wore during the visitation was the same shirt she wore the last time she came to the United States, and to my home. As I looked her outfit over, I noticed the familiar veins in her hands. Not to be unkind, but my aunt had veiny hands, and for a very tiny woman under 100 pounds, her hands and fingers were somewhat less than delicate. Her hands were all too familiar. Once again, my aunt telepathically told me that she has to go now and that I couldn't come with her. I was now sitting upright in my bed. She walked over and she hugged me tightly. I felt her 2 hands on my upper back. I have never felt something more real. This was the deepest, most penetrating hug that I have ever felt. It touched me deep into the depths of my soul. This angelic hug isn't something that can easily be described. That heavenly feeling stayed with long after she left. After she hugged me, she grabbed my 2 hands and squeezed them tightly. I looked down and saw her square-shaped fingers and her veiny hands as they squeezed mine. She told me that she loved me and that she would never leave me. The hug she gave me is one that I will never forget. I felt completely at peace. Then, once again, she vanished. Afterwards, I stood up, left the bedroom, went downstairs and looked all around the house, tearfully looking for her again. At which point, my husband walked into the kitchen. He saw me crying as I walked from room to room looking for my aunt. He asked me what happened as he saw how distraught I was, and I told him what I had just experienced. I thought that he wouldn't believe me or he would think that I was dreaming, but he just knew. He saw it on my face. He knew that she really had come to see me. He told me he fully believed she had just visited me and he wasn't even surprised. He understood that special bond that we had. This visitation was an experience that left me physically and mentally exhausted for a few days. I felt as if I hadn't slept in a week. So on top of this visitation that took place on a Thursday, a few days later, the next Monday morning, my aunt's son, my cousin, sends me a text while I'm at work. His text message came at a very unusual time as he almost never texts me. This particular Monday morning, when I arrived at work, we had an emergency faculty meeting before school began. I'm both a college professor and an elementary school teacher. This faculty meeting and situation took place at the elementary school, not the university. We were told that half of the building would be closed off and students in this wing would be relocated to other areas and join other classrooms in the building until pest control dealt with a bat situation. There were bats spotted in the other wing of the building. Obviously, the teachers didn't want to create mass hysteria with students and their families, but truth be told, I'm terrified of birds and bats. So, needless to say, my anxiety level inside of me was elevated. The bird/bat fear likely stemmed from having a red-tailed hawk swoop down at me and graze my cheek once when running in the park. Either that or having some insane teacher show the Alfred Hitchcock movie The Birds when I was in 6th grade. That would be scarring to any young child. Anyhow, that's a story for another day. Just know that flying creatures have always freaked me out. So around 9:30 a.m. on this particular Monday, I look at my cell phone on my desk only to be surprised that I got a text message from my cousin. Before I read the text, I was worried that it was some bad news about another elderly relative in decline. Thankfully, it wasn't. Instead, it was a picture of my aunt with her arms spread out and a bunch of giant birds all over her arms. The text said, "Here is someone to brighten your day." Honestly, I just found it so ironic that, at that very moment, right there in that elementary school with a flying bat situation, my cousin that almost never texts me decides to send me this random picture of my aunt. A tiny old lady with all these giant birds on her arms and head, from when she was in Costa Rica on a vacation years ago when she was alive. It was as if my aunt was reminding me not to worry about anything. In a weird twist, my fear about birds and bats melted away in that moment, and I felt that same feeling of peace wash over me, the same way I did after I felt her angelic hug. I think my fear melted away because that texted picture of her in that very moment was a clear reminder that, although she is no longer living, she is still with me, just like she promised. She said she would always be with me. Dear Raven, your channel is one of the best out there. Thanks for that, and I hope this story can contribute. It turned out a bit long, so I'm sorry for that. I don't know where to begin properly, but it involves my grandpa and the gift you could say that he had. A little background, I'm from a rather big Dutch Indo family. Dutch Indo is about the best way to translate this, I think. There are families from the former Dutch East Indies colony of mixed European and Asian heritage. I don't know if our Asian side has anything to do with this, but my grandpa always had dreams that proved to be partly predictions, or had some kind of meaning in them. My grandpa seemed to know more than most of us, or seemed to be in closer contact to some hidden spiritual side of life than most of us. Like, he once had a dream in which an angel showed him a passport with 92 in it. He believed it meant he was to become 92 years old. But it turned out, my grandmother was to pass away in his 92nd year. His dreams were always cryptic like that. And it was always in hindsight that you could say, well, that probably foretold something. Another one was where he dreamed of two sparrows sitting on an electrical cord, like you see stretched over the countryside. The first sparrow is then hit by some kind of projectile, falls down to the ground, and died very quickly. The second sparrow is then also hit but lives and struggles. I believe Grandpa dreamed the fact that my aunt was diagnosed with cancer and died 2 weeks after, and then my uncle was also diagnosed with cancer, but he lived for another year or so before he passed away. About himself in his 93rd year, he asked my cousin if we, the family, could sing the Christmas song Silent Night, Holy Night at his funeral. This was quite out of the blue, somewhere in summer. In July or something. So my cousin said, "Sure, Grandpa, anything you wish, of course." My grandpa was to pass away on Christmas Eve of that year. Now, the Dutch Indo culture, or at least our family culture, focuses on personal modesty in favor of the family, which is why we are very close despite being a big family. I had 5 uncles and 6 aunts, and I have about 25 cousins, and the older ones all have children. My grandparents' modest apartment always was everyone's second home, and you could always just drop by for coffee, or a meal, or just to read a magazine. It was all good. I remember as early as a young child, you would sit on the ground. When you were a little older, you could sit on one of the stools, and as you got older, you could have a spot on the chair or the sofa. Until the house got full of older family members, and then you moved a step back on that ladder again. This is to describe how special it felt to me that my grandparents loved everyone in that family, but that I felt you as an individual shouldn't expect to be noticed very much. Not that it was a bad thing, just a small sacrifice to be part of such a big, loving family. Now for my personal story that I would like to submit. I myself have never been very good at school. You know how teachers used to say how you are there for your own future and not for them? Then why do I have to be here? I would think, as a young kid and stupid kid. A few decades later now, my fiancé says I have problems with authority. I naturally disagree. I'm not one to be fighting all the time. I just tend not to listen to people that don't interest me. Okay, so maybe she's a little right. But that made me drop out of school before graduation year, and then I went to work. I figured you could either suffer through school longer than I did, or you would have to accept lower-end jobs with less pay. I always felt there had to be something that I would be good at, but most people aren't, so that I could earn decent money doing that. Of course, the wise adult would talk that down immediately to make you conform to school and everything. But then, after about 10 years of dead-end jobs, I found a training program to become public transport bus driver. None of my family had ever done such kind of work, so it was a bit of a leap for me, but I took it. The selection process was tough, but I managed a cognitive capabilities score that, on average, only 1.74 people out of 100 would score better than me. I'm proud of this, but also must say that I have some talent, right? The complete program took 2 years. The first year would be 3 days working and 1 day of school. The second day would be 1 part official school subjects so that we would get an official diploma. The other part would be learning about the whole public transport operations side. At the end of the 2 years, you would have paid back half the cost for the driver's license from working, and the company would gift you the other half. Then you would be set with a decent job, of course. At the end of the program, there would be a graduation ceremony, and a day prior, I got a feeling that I would be asked to say a few words on behalf of the class. With all I told about my grandpa at this point, I can safely say that I do sometimes have these feelings, or intuitions, too. Mostly when driving. I would have a thought or feeling that I should take it a bit more easy ahead, and then I would turn the corner to find that something would have happened there, or traffic would be partially stuck. So the day prior to the graduation ceremony, I thought, if I'm to speak in front of everybody, then I'll start off with a joke. I'll thank them for the honor and then pull out a stack of papers, as if I had prepared a massively long speech. To that end, I looked for some papers that I could fold and stuff into my pocket for the next day. I found a stack of papers, and I randomly picked up the upper portion of them to see what they were, but they were too valuable for that. You see, since somewhere in the 70s or 80s, my grandparents always had a notebook lying in their apartment. Anyone who would come over would write something, anything in it, if they would like. It was a very early low-tech version of what would now be a family group chat. Then, when my grandpa passed away, my uncle took the project upon himself to go through all the boxes of notebooks and type out every entry of my grandpa's, and other stories that my grandpa told about his time in the Second World War and such. He then printed them and gave them to my dad and their siblings, and my dad gave his copied stack to me, because I like history and stuff. So, I put the top portion of the stack down beside the bottom part, and went ahead with my plan with some different papers. We had a great graduation day. I was, in fact, asked to say a few words like I expected, and I dreaded it a bit, but the joke worked out well and everybody laughed. A few days later, I came across that stack of papers again. I was going to put them away neatly, so I double-checked because I forgot which would be the top and which would be the bottom. That's when I noticed the page that had come to face up after I took the random portion off. The very last entry on that page immediately drew my attention. It was a bit on what my grandpa had dreamed on the 26th of November 2011, which was titled, "A Weird Dream." This is the interesting bit, and as literally translated as I can. I dreamed I was in a bus on my way home. Very vaguely, I knew that I was on the bus with my mom. We rode for a while, and all of a sudden I was alone in a different bus with different passengers and an Indo bus driver. Before, I may have read it and didn't think much of it, but given these circumstances, I immediately thought, wow, did my grandpa ride along with me? Mind you, I entered into the program in 2018, so some 7 years after my grandpa dreamed this, and after he would pass away on Christmas Eve of 2011. Now, in the present, both of my parents and all 4 of my grandparents have passed away, and although I miss them all the time, I quite often miss my paternal grandpa. A couple of the bus routes also pass right by my grandparents' old home, and I have so often thought about how cool it would have been to tell Grandpa what times I would pass, and I'm very sure that he would have waited by the window to wave at me. I'm actually crying right now thinking of all this. I hope you can work with this, Raven, or in any case, I thank you for reading this. I love to listen to the stories you read while being on the road doing my rounds, so please, keep it up. So, I feel that I should preface this by saying that I only ever dealt with the paranormal as a child, mainly in my room. I don't know if something had happened in my room before I lived there, but I do remember that I had multiple unsettling experiences. On this night, I remember going to sleep easily, but at some point I had gotten woken up to hearing a dull tapping from under my bed. Which is surprising since I used to sleep like the dead. But somehow, when I had awoken, I felt that something was off. I wasn't fully aware and had assumed that I just woke myself up for no reason. Maybe the tap was in my dreams. As I started to drift back to sleep, I felt the slats supporting my mattress shift. I was surprised, but assumed it was my sister hiding under the bed trying to scare me. I wanted to get her back and started to slowly lean over the side. Wait, did I just hear a tap against the opposite side of my frame? Was my sister going to try to grab my leg from the small gap against the wall? I still played along and dipped over the edge of my bed. Huh? Where was Renee? Is she actually on the top bunk sleeping? My eyes started to adjust to the dark and I noticed feet. Right as I noticed the feet, I felt the bed dip behind me. I went rigid. I didn't dare move. I could tell that the bed was dipping on either side of my feet like someone's palms were pressing in. I'm wide awake now, and that's when I hear it. I can hear my sister softly snoring from above me. This isn't my sister. I should have known. There's no way she could have crawled up onto the bed from there. There's no breath either. I should be able to hear the thing hunched behind me, or at least hear it scratch the wall, right? How can it even be sitting like that? It can't be on its knees if I can see the feet. Bones just don't work like that. I don't know why 7-year-old me just accepted their fate. What was I gonna do? Run? I was basically upside down, as vulnerable as I could have been. The only thing I could think of was to reason with it. Shakily, I whispered out, "I get my bed and you get under the bed. I won't bother you if you stay there, okay?" I felt the weight shift again as I watched the calves come into view. At least, I think they were calves. I couldn't really tell what it was made of, but I averted my eyes because I really didn't want to see it look back at me. When I felt the weight leave my bed, I crawled back up until I was a pile of limbs and blankets in the middle of my bed. I felt comfort in knowing it wouldn't be able to touch me now. It was probably more of that I wouldn't be able to feel it through all the layers. I squeezed my eyes shut, just hoping I would wake up at any moment. That it would just be a dream within a dream. Well, I did wake up the next morning, relieved feeling that it was just a dream, even though I still made it a habit to leap into bed or tie my shoes from the floor so that I could see under my bed. Later that week, I made the mistake of telling my sister my dream, and she told me that a couple of nights ago she heard a tapping, and not on the bed frame. She heard something tapping the heater. She told me that when she looked to see what it was, she saw a hand. A thin, needle-like hand tapping the heater to almost mimic the sound of it heating up. Needless to say, I begged my sister for months to let me sleep on the top bunk, and eventually she let me. Over time, I sort of pushed the events to the back of my mind. It still sticks with me to this day. It just feels a little too real. But I feel that I made an agreement on that day, and I guess that ghost or entity was kind enough to respect my boundaries. I'm just glad that I don't live there anymore. I have a strange and creepy thing that happened to me a while back, and honestly it's something that I genuinely cannot explain. I used to be a driver for a rideshare service that's pretty well known, and because of that, I was out on the road for a lot of the afternoon and evening. I would typically do the job until around 10 p.m. at night, and then head home from there, and go to bed to wake up to do my day job. It was a rough schedule to follow, and I was losing a lot of sleep because of it, but it is what it is. This whole thing took place in mid-April, and we were getting hit with some pretty intense spring storms. Where I live, we get the major rain and thunderstorms through April, to the point of getting tornadoes. But money is money, and I was at the point where I needed to get paid. Plus, rainstorms meant that there was a chance of more clients. because people don't want to walk out in the rain. I was out taking the riders to where they needed to go, and I had finished what I planned to be my last ride, and I was heading back to the gas station. I then saw a young man walking on the side of the road, soaking wet. Part of me said that he was fine, but the other part of me thought that I should ask him if he was okay, at the very least, because I would want people to do that for me. I pulled over, careful not to splash him as I stopped, and rolled down the window asking if he needed a ride. At first he seemed a bit standoffish and hesitant, but after a few moments he nodded and thanked me, then walked around and got into the passenger seat. I asked him where he needed to go, and he asked me if I could take him to the Walmart that was in town. I lived over in that direction, so I was more than willing to do so. I mentioned that I could get him there and mentioned that I did have to stop at the gas station though, because I was about to be on E. He said that was fine, and that he could use something to drink anyways. We headed off, and the whole time we were driving, he just kind of stared at the road, not saying anything. I didn't want to push him into any small talk if he wasn't comfortable. I just mentioned the storm and said it was pretty crazy, and he nodded with a slight smile. The whole ride, this guy looked like he was really upset. Like he wanted to cry but was holding it back, which was why I really didn't want to push him into chatting. We pulled up to the gas station, and I parked at the pump, and he just kind of stood around for a moment while I filled my tank. I then asked if he was going to go inside to get his drink, and he mentioned that he didn't have his wallet, that he'd left it behind. I could tell that this kid was going through a tough time, so I told him that I would buy his drink if he wanted it, and again, he seemed a bit standoffish. I said that it was fine, and that I would be happy to do so long as he paid it forward and helped someone else out in need in the future. He nodded and again thanked me. We walked into the gas station, the guy at the counter greeted us, and as soon as we got in, the guy said that he was going to use the restroom really quick. I said okay, and I watched him walk toward the back where the restrooms were. I then went over and got my soda, and then waited near the counter. After a few minutes, the clerk kind of looked at me and asked if I needed help with anything, and I said that I was just waiting for the guy that came in with me. He gave me a very confused stare. I mentioned that the guy I came in with had gone to the restroom, and then said that I was just giving him a ride to the Walmart. He then said, "You didn't come in with anyone, sir." I described the guy in detail, and mentioned that when we walked in, he went straight to the restroom. The clerk said that that was impossible, because the restrooms were locked after 9 p.m., and in order to use them, you had to get the key, and he still had the key. He then pulled the key out from under the desk, attached to a little keychain animal thing, and said that in order to get into the restroom, he would have had to have used that key. I was a bit confused. I watched the kid go into the restroom, or at least I thought I did. I watched him go to the door and reach for it, and then went to get my soda, which was by the front counter. The restroom was in front of me the whole time until I was standing there by the counter, waiting for the guy to come out, at which point I was near the hall where it was. I asked if I could go check on him in the restroom, because I was certain that he was in there, and the clerk said that that was fine. He handed me the key, and I went to the restroom. I knocked, and when I got no answer, I unlocked it. It was completely empty, and it looked like it hadn't been used for a few hours. I looked back at the hallway, and there was no exit there. It was just the one door to the restroom, and the closet where all the soda syrup pumps were. There was literally nowhere to go in this area. He was nowhere to be seen. At no point could he have exited this hallway with the restroom without me seeing him. There was no exit, hole, window, or method that he could have gotten out of the building. I walked up and just kind of stared at the clerk like, what the hell? He returned my very confused look and asked if I was okay. I kind of mumbled that I must have been losing my mind and just paid for my soda, thanking the clerk for his time and help. I walked out to my car and sat there in the driver's seat and just pondered what the hell this hall was. There was no way for him to have gotten out of that station without me seeing him, outside of him somehow climbing through the ceiling. Which, yeah, I don't think that happened. The clerk said that he didn't see me walk in with anyone, which makes me think that this kid never existed. But he got in my car, and I spoke to him, and I drove him to the gas station. I honestly have no idea what to make of this event, and it's one of those things that seriously messed with me for this last year. I swear that this kid existed. I swear he got in my car and walked into the station. But everything else seems to point at him never having existed. Was this some kind of spirit? Did I give a ride to a ghost or some kind of paranormal anomaly? I have no clue, and I honestly don't think I'm ever going to know. I work in tech support for a local internet service provider. It's not a glamorous job, it's incredibly boring, but it pays my rent and allows me to have food for the most part. So, it's the job that I've done for about 5 years now. The office is one of those old buildings that they've tried to modernize, but you can still feel that age in the bones of the place. Like, some parts of it still feel like they're from decades ago, no matter how much they paint over them. Creepy, right? On one particular evening, I was working the late shift. We were 24/7. Troubleshooting for a particularly irate customer whose internet had been going in and out all day. I was walking her through the standard procedures. Okay, well, let's unplug the modem and wait for 30 seconds. That kind of stuff. When something caught my eye. I was in the middle of giving some instruction when my skin started crawling, and the hair on my arms stood up. I swear that I saw what looked like a person walking past my desk. You may think, yeah, it's an office, that's entirely possible, but the overnight shift is the most bare-bones staff possible. There were 4 floor techs, the ones that took the calls, and then 1 lead tech, which was only there for escalations. The floor for the call center was split into 2 sections. There was the dark section in the back that was built like a large conference room, and then the main floor. And, at the time, the other 4 people were in the dark room, and I was on the main floor, because that was my assigned desk. If any of the other techs needed to go to the restroom, the break room, or even leave, they wouldn't pass me. They would have walked on the other end of the building. So there was no reason for someone to have walked behind my desk. I shook it off, rubbed my arms to get the hairs back down, and finished up the troubleshooting with the customer. After I wrapped up the call, I sent a message to the lead and told him that I was going to step away for a few moments to go to the restroom, and he said that was fine. So I locked my system and stood up. As soon as I stood up, I heard a loud thud to my left, and I swear I jumped a foot in the air. I quickly turned to see what the hell it was, and about 2 desks down from me, the monitor that was on the desk was now lying on the floor, and the chair was knocked over. The lead ran up and asked what had happened, and I just shrugged like, I have no idea. He saw the chair knocked over and the screen lying on the floor and asked if I did it. I said that I hadn't even gone over there and that it wasn't me. I went over and picked up the chair, and I grabbed the monitor, which was unfortunately busted. I told him that it was messed up, and that it was going to need to be replaced before the person that sat there got in the next morning. He said that he would let the head managers know so they could get it all figured out the next morning, and told me to go take my break. I went to the restroom and then went over to the break room to get some coffee to help me get through the next few hours of doing nothing. The office was deathly quiet, with literally the only sound filling most of the empty space being the humming of the break room vending machine. I was pouring my coffee and I got that same chill down my spine, and once again the hairs on my arms stood up, and I felt incredibly cold. I shivered and finished getting my coffee as quickly as I could because I was feeling incredibly uncomfortable. When, out of nowhere, I heard someone whisper,
"Sorry if I scared you."
I don't mean like a slight voice in the room, I mean right in my ear. I once again jumped and ended up pouring coffee all over the counter because of it. I spun around to go off on whoever had just scared me, but there was no one there. I cleaned up the mess and poured a new cup of coffee in record time, and I nearly ran back to my desk to get my headset back on so that I could ignore whatever was going on. I will say that the rest of my shift was uneventful, thankfully. But it wasn't the last thing that happened in this series of events. In fact, it actually got a bit creepier, and rather saddening. When I showed up for work the next day, I noticed that the lead manager was still at his desk, and he called me over to his office when I came in. Usually, these kinds of things are not good. They typically mean you're getting fired. But he told me that I wasn't in trouble or anything, and he wanted to inform me about something that had happened to one of my coworkers. I was a bit confused, but I sat down and listened. He went on to tell me that Ronnie, one of the guys that worked there, had been found dead the night before. I was shocked to hear this. Ronnie was one of those guys that everyone knew. The dude was an absolute gem of a coworker. He was actually a part-time stand-up comedian, and he was charismatic as all get out. He mentioned that his death had looked like an accident, and he mentioned that the center was offering therapy if anyone needed it, because people were taking this pretty hard. He also mentioned that they were running a fundraiser for his family to cover any expenses, and talked to me about how to donate if I wanted. I thanked him, told him that it was incredibly saddening, and we spoke for just a couple of minutes about things, and then I went to my desk to start my shift. When I sat down, I paused for a moment. I just paused and thought about the prior night, the night that Ronnie had actually passed away. And I glanced over at the desk with the monitor and the chair that had randomly been knocked over, and I'm sure you're seeing where this is going. That desk was Ronnie's desk. On the night that Ronnie died, I had experienced some weird and chilling paranormal-like events that included his desk. And I can't shake the possibility that it was Ronnie's spirit. I don't know why his spirit would come to the office, but something about it just felt off. I don't know, it was just too coincidental. It kind of creeped me out. Like, a lot. I considered moving to the day shift after that to avoid the creepy darkness of the building, but in the end, I figured that it probably wouldn't happen again. And if it did, I would just assume that it was Ronnie. I hope that he found peace, and that his spirit wasn't stuck here, because I couldn't imagine being forced to haunt your place of employment for all of eternity. I'm working as a custodian at my old school. I know, really living the dream, right? Understaffed, overworked, and underpaid, just like everyone else is right now. There are perks to this job, however. I live 2 minutes away. Great benefits, and if something comes up on a Friday, I can come in Saturday to make up for it, without having to use any of my PTO or vacation days. One dreary Saturday morning, I was making up for the night before. Cold and rainy, just how I like it. My coworker was supposed to come in as well to set up for a basketball game and to make some overtime, or so I thought. I show up and I'm the only one in the entire school. Now, it may be a small district, but our school is pretty big for such a small community. We have grade school, middle school, and high school all under one roof. I work in the middle school section of the building, smack dab in the center of the school. Middle school. Get it? I was walking down to my custodial closet when I heard a toilet flush. Now, this wouldn't be a big deal if the lights to the bathroom weren't motion sensors, as well as the toilets. I thought to myself, okay, I'm not even going to acknowledge that, and just kept walking. Being all alone in a building that big, your mind is sure to play tricks on you, although I'm sure I look weird on the security cameras constantly looking over my shoulder, or around corners. I get to the custodial closet, grab my cart and garbage can, and start on my normal routine. 2 hours in, I have to go to the bathroom. I use a private one behind the kitchen in one of our 3 boiler rooms. Each section of the building has its own boiler room, where we keep additional supplies. This will be important later in the story. I go to the bathroom and have my AirPods in when I thought I heard someone walk in. I take them out, and I hear the sound of running water. I call out to see if someone else is in the bathroom with me, but I don't get a response. I finish up in the stall and open the door to see nobody there, but the sink is running scalding hot water. Now, this is super weird, because this sink wasn't running when I walked in, and it takes forever for it to warm up, let alone get that hot. I washed my hands and noped out of there. Everything else went without incident, up until my last 2 hours. We hold off on cleaning the restrooms for last, for obvious reasons. You don't want to clean them just to have someone come in and trash it again. I was restocking the paper towel dispensers when I realized I was out of paper towels to put in them, so I head over to the boiler room in the grade school section of the building. As I unlock the magnetic doors to the grade school, I could have sworn that I heard someone slam the boiler room door closed. I thought to myself, I knew it was my coworker messing around with me, and I walked over to the door that just slammed shut, only to open it, and inside the lights were off. I turned the lights on and looked around. There was no sign of anybody being in there since last night. There is a door that leads outside to the district office with a small window in it. At this point, I'm on edge and praying that if I walk over to it, I'll see my coworker outside laughing at me. I inch my way over to the window and see nobody outside. As I'm looking out of the window pondering just what the hell is happening, I hear a loud bang behind me. At this point, I'm kind of thinking about running out of the door and just going home because something is clearly not happy that I'm here. I somehow muster up the courage to turn around, and again, nobody is there, but a whole case of Lysol is on the ground. Now, you're probably thinking, okay, so it slid off, but no. This particular case of Lysol had mold or something growing on the side of it, and it was covered in dust from having been sitting there for 20 plus years, before one of our coworkers died from complications involving COVID. We called it his case, but out of respect, I won't name their name. I inspect a little further on the top shelf to see if it did in fact slide off. There were no slide marks. It was like someone picked it up, held it over the edge of the shelf, and dropped it. I didn't even put it back before leaving the boiler room and the grade school to escape to my closet for a breather. Since then, I haven't had a single incident. I've stayed from 8:30 p.m. to 5:30 a.m. by myself and haven't experienced anything weird, outside of the usual sound from something kicking on the other side of the school. I listen to your podcast at work, Raven, and thanks for keeping me entertained while I do boring, monotonous work for terrible pay. Well, thank you for sending your story in, because that was creepy. Now, I want to preface this story by stating that I'm a very analytical person. I'm a technical business analyst, for God's sake, so my livelihood is to analyze and find reasoning behind every situation. But it's to the point where I can't deny that something is living in my family home, and it imitates my mum. I live in Queensland, Australia. In about 2004, we moved into a very old Queenslander home. Google Queenslander home and you'll see the type of house I'm talking about. It was a big fixer-upper, with very high ceilings, and a beautiful deck that caught the summer breeze perfectly. It was the first house built in the entire street over 150 years ago, and used to be a celery farm. Random, I know. About 15 years ago, my cousin was sleeping over one night, we were very close, and she told me all about her paranormal experiences. For context, she grew up in Indonesia and her mother was apparently into black magic, so she has seen and experienced a lot of the paranormal. "Is there anything in my house?" I asked her. "Yes," she replied. "She sits on the windowsill of your mom's room." "Is it bad?" I asked, not too sure if I actually wanted to hear the answer. "Just don't bother it," she said, shutting down the conversation. Fast forward a few years, I was sitting on my bed studying with the door open. I then see my mum walk down the hallway with the washing basket, about to put on a load of laundry. About 5 seconds later, I see her walk down the hallway with the washing basket, going the same direction she was before. I was baffled. How could she walk the same direction twice? I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was studying and it was late. About a year passes, and I had forgotten the spooky incident of my mum walking in the same direction twice. It was a Friday afternoon and I had my best friend over, and we were hanging out in the kitchen talking to my mum. Mum was cooking dinner and me and my friend were just chatting away. My brother then appears from his room. "Where's dinner?" he asked. "Still another 13 minutes away," Mum replies. "But you just came into my bedroom and told me dinner was ready." We all froze still, silent. Chills ran up the back of my spine as I remembered the incident that happened a year prior. "No, I didn't," Mum responded. "Yes, you did," my brother exclaimed. "You knocked, opened my door, walked into my room, and told me that dinner was ready." I can vouch for my mom that she did not do this. After all, I was with her the entire time. My brother shook his head. Perhaps I'm imagining things, and walked back to his room. I knew he wasn't imagining things. From there, things got weird, but only for me. My brother never had another experience, and neither did my mom. My placid dog, a big fat golden lab, would jump up from her sleep and growl and bark at the corner of the room. Doors that I closed would open up behind me, and I always felt like something did not want me there. Fast forward a few years, I had moved out of home and was asked by my mom to dog sit while she went away for the weekend. I did. It was a hot summer night and I was in the spare bedroom with the air conditioning on freezing cold. Then, at the exact same time, the air conditioning turned off, my phone went to do not disturb, and the bedroom door flung open. I don't mean the door creaked open, I mean flung, as if someone swung it open in anger. I jumped up and ran out of the room, calling my boyfriend, freaking out. He calmed me down, and for whatever reason, I stayed at the house. As a horror film fanatic, I know that this was a dumb move. It then came time for bed, so I went to take the dog outside to go potty before bringing her back in. She's a stubborn old thing, so I have to physically go outside and stand in the backyard with her, otherwise she will not go. Whilst we were outside, and the dog was sniffing around trying to find her toilet spot for that evening, I felt something. I don't know how to describe it, because I didn't actually see anything, but I felt something that looked like my mother at the end of the backyard, standing and looking directly at me. I know that sounds weird, but the feeling was so strong. People will say it was your mind playing tricks on you, but it wasn't. Because I have never before nor since had a feeling like that. It was like I was seeing something without actually seeing it. I sensed it. And I sensed it strong. She was in a nightgown, blonde shoulder-length hair, looking just like my mother, except cold and motionless, and angry. I rushed the dog back inside and went to bed. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. Whatever it was imitating my mother, it did not like me. It never showed itself to my mom or brother, but for some reason loved to torment me. That was until recently. I was over at my mom's for dinner and the topic of ghost stories came up. I brought up all the experiences I'd had at that house, and how I found it so strange that Mom never experienced it. Mom looked at me with a blank stare, almost as if she was trying to hold something in. "What is it?" I asked. "Well, the other week, something happened." She began to tell me the story, which finally made her realize I was telling the truth. Except this time it imitated someone else. Mom was with her friend on the balcony having some tea. "Hey, where's the bathroom?" her friend asked. "Just down the hallway," Mom replied. Her friend then got up to go to the bathroom. From the balcony, you can pretty much see everything from the house as it looked straight down the hallway. Mom looked down, drinking her afternoon tea, and when she looked back up, she saw her friend walk out of the toilets and into my mom's bedroom. "Hey," friend's name, Mom shouted out. "What are you doing?" No response. "Friend's name?" Mom shouted a bit more, getting up from her seat to go and see why she went into her room. Just as she was about to walk down the hall, there appeared her friend, walking out of the toilet. There was nobody in her bedroom. I don't know what this thing is that imitates people in my mom's house, but I know it's not nice. It's not friendly, and it does not want me around. All I can say is, I'm glad that I moved the hell out. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? As a disclaimer, please do not try this, ever. Knowing what I know now, this is probably one of the most idiotic things I have ever done. I not only put myself in danger, but also my family and friends. Also, this happened about 15 years ago, so I will relay all that my memory serves me. I'm no longer in contact with the friend that the story involves, so forgive me if I forget any details. I will be happy to answer any questions I can, and will try my best to write everything that I can remember, in the order in which it happened. That being said, when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with the paranormal. My high school buddies and I thought it would be a great idea to get stoned in my parents' garage and construct a Ouija board. It was after school one afternoon when we implemented our plan. We arrived at my parents' house and got right to work finding supplies to make the board, and if I remember correctly, found an old shot glass to use as the planchette. We decided to ask the most provoking questions you could think of. Everything the internet told us never to ask whatever was on the other side. But we wanted a big response. We wanted something crazy to happen. We got a response almost instantly, and we each thought the others were moving the planchette to mess with us. But we were soon to find out that it was real. I believe I was the one asking most of the questions. I remember asking, "When did you die?" The planchette moved to the numbers that we scrawled on the board. The exact year escapes me, but it was something in the late 1980s. I know I asked the spirit's name. I cannot remember the name, so we'll just call the spirit, or rather demon, as we would soon discover, Robert. Robert would not disclose how he died, although he did say that his favorite band was Nirvana. This will be relevant later. We had a classic rock mix playing in the background, and he seemed to enjoy this. Unfortunately, I do not remember most of the conversation, but I do remember we didn't say goodbye when the session concluded. That night, my friends left, except for one who stayed the night. We'll call her Jane. For this part, I'll need to describe the layout of the house. It was an old house with a weird setup. When you would enter through the front door, there was a medium-sized living room with a huge bay window facing the street. Going further into the house, on the left was the kitchen. Beyond that was a glass door, behind which was a sort of a family room. And then the backyard, which led to the garage. Jane and I were chilling in the kitchen later that night, and we were seated at the kitchen table. Jane was sitting with her back towards the glass door that leads to the family room, and I was facing her and the door. We were chatting quietly, as my family was sleeping. She was talking, and as I was looking at her, something behind her caught my eye. The glass door was cracked open, but it was slowly opening wider and wider. As soon as I pointed at the door and she turned to look, it slammed shut very forcefully. It was so damn loud that I was sure my parents would wake up and we would be in trouble. But no one woke up or yelled at us to be quiet. We got so freaked out, we quickly retreated to my room, past the front living room. We talked in my room for quite some time, and nothing else weird happened until we went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange, slow scratching noise. At first, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I don't think Jane woke up, so I got up and tried to decipher where the sound was coming from. Finally, I realized it was coming from my closet. The door was closed, and I knew that there was nothing in there that should be making that noise. The only pet that we had in the house was an old border collie, and he slept in my parents' room at the end of the hall. I jumped back into bed and threw the covers over my head and tried to ignore the sounds coming from the closet. I don't know how long it took for me to get back to sleep, or if I even did, but the next thing I knew, it was morning, and Jane had to go back home later that day. We decided to go to the garage to smoke, and the air felt so heavy as soon as we stepped inside. Like we shouldn't be in there even though we chilled in that garage countless times before. We went back in the house and sat on the couch in the living room. We were either talking or watching TV, but I think at that point I went into some sort of trance. Jane later told me that I suddenly stopped responding to her and I wasn't moving, even though my eyes were open. The only thing I remember before coming to was the feeling of the back of the couch sinking in. I felt as though I was being slowly sucked into the couch, and my back felt so hot. It was like there was fire getting closer and closer to my back. Then, right before I snapped out of it, I felt hands on me, like they were trying to grab and pull me even further into the couch. I know it sounds dumb, but I thought I was being pulled into hell. I'm aware that there's no demonic portal in my parents' couch that leads to hell, but I swear to you that this is what it felt like. When I finally snapped out of it, Jane was looking at me with a look of concern on her face, and I felt like I was having a panic attack. I can't remember much after that, but her parents arrived to pick her up a short time later and she left. That night, I was absolutely terrified to sleep in my room. So, being the dumbass that I am, I decided I would crash on the hell couch with the TV on all night. I didn't think that I would sleep, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. I don't know what time it was when I suddenly woke up with a jolt. The TV I know for a fact I left on was now turned off. In its reflection, I could see the bay window slightly illuminated by the streetlight outside. Then, I noticed it. A figure standing behind me so tall that it touched the ceiling. Its head and neck craned down to stare at me. It was so black that it was darker than everything else in the room, and it was motionless. I was too scared to move. I just feigned to still be asleep. I don't remember slipping back into slumber, but just like the previous night, before I knew it, it was morning again. I decided to take a shower. Upon undressing, I noticed that my side was sore and hurting pretty bad when I took off my shirt. I looked, and there were deep scratches in the shape of the Nirvana logo. That wonky-looking smiley face. At that point, I knew that this wasn't just a spirit that I was dealing with. I don't know why I never told my parents what was going on, but one day my dad, who didn't even believe in the paranormal, told me he was taking a shower when all of a sudden the faucet turned on its own, and the water got hot so suddenly that it scalded him. Now I was pissed. I had allowed a demon to mess with my family. I promised myself I would never mess with a Ouija board or even be around one ever again. I begged a Catholic friend of mine to come over and bless the house and garage, and she agreed. She brought a bunch of supplies for the blessing. Afterwards, we disposed of the board and we prayed. Nothing happened in that house ever again, and we ended up moving a couple of years later. As an adult, I became a Christian. I've still had experiences with the paranormal after this story, but now I know that I'm protected and how to rid demonic energy from my life. I'm sorry if this ending is anticlimactic, and also for the length of the story, but thank you for listening. First, a disclaimer. I did not witness the main events in this story. The reason why I believe this story are that the person who did experience it is my older sister with no mental illness. She also has never had any other supernatural experiences. I think that people that make these things up tend to invent more than one instance. Another reason I believe this is because I, too, had scary things happen to me in that same house. As a matter of fact, so did every one of my family members at one time or another. Also, there were other witnesses to parts of these events. The reason to doubt the veracity of this tale is only one. My sister was under a lot of stress at the time of all this happening to her. Enough preamble, let's begin. My family owns a large vacation home in Mexico. My sister was going through a divorce from an abusive ex, so in an attempt to keep her safe, she and my mother decided to hide out at the vacation house until the psycho ex calmed down about the divorce. My sister, let's call her June, had a room toward the front of the house, and my mother took a room which adjoined to another room where my sister's kids, ages 2 and 3, were staying. Their rooms were toward the far end of the house. On the first or second night of their stay, June awoke at 3 in the morning as if startled. She looked around the dark room and saw the shadow of a person in the corner. She couldn't think of anything making that shadow, but was exhausted and eventually fell back asleep. At the same time the next night, she awoke again, suddenly with a start. Again, she saw the same shadow. This time, she decided to investigate what was making that shadow. She turned on the light, and the shadow disappeared. She checked for anything that could possibly be making a human-shaped shadow, but saw nothing. At some point, she went back to bed and fell asleep, more confused than anything. This happened again many nights. Finally, June decided to move all of the furniture to different spots to just stop the shadow, as it was now spooking her. The night of the day when she moved the furniture, she again awoke at 3 a.m. with alarm. And much to her consternation, the shadow appeared exactly as before. At this point, she'd had enough and yelled at the shadow, "What do you want?" The shadow rushed toward her with surprising speed. It did not walk. It glided as if in the air. It reached within inches of her face when she pulled the covers over her head and yelled, "Mommy." And remember, this is a full-grown woman. Apparently, she yelled so loud that my mother heard her from all the way at the other end of the house, awoke, and ran to June's room. She flicked the light on and ran toward her, asking what was wrong. The shadow was no longer there. After June explained everything to Mom decided to contact a spiritualist and a priest. The priest, the spiritualist, and my aunt came by to bless and cleanse the house. After cleansing and blessing, the spiritualist told my sister that the shadow wanted June to have a treasure buried behind the house. If she retrieved the treasure, then the shadow would stop visiting. So that is what they decided to do. They hired a couple of workers to tear the floor up and find this supposed treasure. Once they got a couple of feet or so deep in the spot that they were, according to the spiritualist, supposed to dig, a swarm of flies filled the house, as did the smell of sulfur. This naturally frightened everyone, as this is supposed to mean evil is afoot. Still, they dug. My sister was near hysteria at this point. The spiritualist tried to calm her and reminded her that it would all stop once the treasure was June's. Whereupon June screamed, "I don't want their stinking treasure!" At that moment, the flies disappeared, as did the sulfur smelled. The diggers had found something square underground, which seemed to disappear as well. After that, all the spooky happenings ceased. Not just the shadow, but other strange goings-on that I didn't get into here. In the end, I don't know why that stopped everything. Was this some sort of greed test that she passed? Who knows? She was just glad that it all stopped. I know how unbelievable this story sounds, but I promise that it is what every witness to the event swore to. Since I don't want people to think I'm making up stories or just plain cuckoo, I hope that you'll leave me anonymous. Hello, Raven, and Happy New Year. I commented the other day on YouTube about a story that you read, the one where the person heard someone breathing when they were going to sleep, and I said that I would write you as I too have had this experience. Please bear with me as this happened a long time ago, and 'tis a lengthy one. My whole life so far has been one long paranormal experience, non-stop from my earliest memories, and I'm in my 50s now. Like a circle, I cannot tell you when it began. It's just my life. It's something to do with the blood. That's what they say in my part of the world anyway, that these things run in families. And it has certainly proved true in my case. Some call it a gift. I don't always think of it as such, especially when you're a kid that's so frightened you dare not even get up to pee in the night. I'm at a stage now in my life where I've overcome the fear and either get annoyed at it all or actively ignore the nonsense. I'm not even going to try to convince anyone that I'm telling the truth, because I know that I am. And that's enough for me. I don't need validation, and I'm too tired to massage the skeptics. I digress already, but only for a little backdrop to this particular occurrence. Like I said, I can't tell you when exactly the breather made its first appearance. I'm estimating prepubescence, around age 10 or 11. It coincides with the nighttime visits from what I now know to be a hat man, but I don't know if they're connected or separate entities. All I can tell you is that they exist. I'm going back to the early 1980s now. No internet, no information in the very small public library, beyond the story of Borley Rectory and Arthur C. Clarke's Strange World. No journals or magazines or TV programs on the paranormal. At least, not in my house. So, no. These people who insist the Hat Man is a phenomena born of creepypasta have got it wrong. Before I get to my experience of him, I will tell you a little of what was going on otherwise. I used to have frequent nightmares, and usually the same general theme: Darth Vader in various ways terrorizing me. Now, I was a Star Wars fan since my dad took me to the cinema to watch the very first movie when it was released. I think I was 7 or 8. Neither Darth Vader nor any other character upset me at the time, and it was surprising that it would be years later when these nightmares began. It was always the same kind of thing. It was his breathing. He would just stare and breathe, and I would be paralyzed with fear. Anyone who's had a night terror will understand the indescribable and irrational fear of that type of energy. I would often wake up to my bedclothes pulled up so high they were wrapped around my head, often suffocating. And they would be so tight. Like, not just up over my head, literally wrapped around it. One time they were tied around my throat, and I did panic a bit, because it took me a while to get free of them. I wore night dresses back then, and they would always be pulled up to my armpits too. I always felt like there was something in the room watching me after I woke up, a very uncomfortable and frightening thing. It would sometimes dissipate, and sometimes hang around. Just a quietly menacing presence. I would be petrified, and unable to move at times. One night, I even tried to sleep in the built-in wardrobe just to feel secure and away from it. And strangely, I never mentioned these terrors to my parents. I was a considerate child, and I knew that they had their own worries, so it never occurred to me to add to them. I was also raised to be somewhat stoic and resilient, and so I didn't share problems easily. It wasn't apparent then, it's only in later life that I have wondered if this was the breather that I encountered later on, because the raspy way Darth would breathe was similar to what I would hear with my awake ears, years later. I had reached the age of 12 or 13 when I first remember the thing in the hat. My father liked to socialize regularly, but my mother hardly ever did. She didn't like alcohol, and she was a little reserved in company. But I persuaded her to go one New Year's Eve to the club with Dad and enjoy herself. She didn't want to leave me in the house, but I convinced her that I was a big girl now and I would be fine. And the club was only at the bottom of our road, and I was responsible enough to come get them if I needed to. So, reluctantly, she went. It turns out that she enjoyed herself playing bingo and would accompany Dad more often from then on. That's when the thing in the hat would turn up, and I would regret trying to socialize my mother. That first night, I stayed up watching TV until it finished. Yes, I'm talking of the time when we had 3 channels, and they stopped broadcasting at midnight. I would have gone to bed earlier, but I kept getting a creepy feeling from outside the room. And I thought that I kept hearing noises on the stairs. But every time I checked, there was nothing to see. I eventually dragged myself up them to the sanctuary of my room and went to bed. I didn't want my mom's first night out to be spoiled by seeing me scared when she came home. I told her not to worry about me, hadn't I? I had to prove myself. I was dropping into the haze of sleep. I could see the light from the landing under my door. I heard my parents come home and my dad came up the stairs. I saw the shadow of his feet under my door, so I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I wanted to show that I was responsible enough to get myself to bed on time. But Dad didn't come into my room. I waited and waited, and then I peeped and saw him in the open doorway. I don't remember hearing the door open. He was in dark shadow. I couldn't see his features at all, and he seemed taller. I wondered why he had a hat on. Pretty sure he didn't go out with a hat on. The only hat he had that resembled that shape was his uniform hat. He was an ambulance man, and in those days, they wore a kind of peaked broad hat. I don't know what the style is called. Kind of like an old bus conductor's hat. And why would he wear that to go out in? My dad was a very smart man of his generation. Always wore a collar and a tie. Always fixed his hair even when staying in the house. This was not making sense. He just stood in the doorway, staring and not moving to the point where it creeped me out. My dad had never frightened me before, even when he was drunk. He was a happy drunk. I was about to pluck up the courage to ask what he was doing when I heard the dog downstairs get excited, and my mom and dad came home. Mom asked Dad to come check on me if he was going upstairs to the bathroom. FYI, I tried to get the dog to sleep in my room, but she absolutely would not stay. The next thing I remember, the dark shape was gone, and Dad came up the stairs, full of joy and beer and a good night out. There were more incidents like this to follow, and many others ones besides, some far more frightening. A darkness, bad luck, ill health, and hardship descended on our family. And I do see that as the turning point, but I want to tell you now more about the breather. So fast forward. I'm 25 years old. My mother had died not a year since, and my dad was ill in the hospital. I had traveled a very long way from one end of the country to the other to come home. It was late, and I was exhausted. The dog had passed not long after Mum, and I was alone in my old room in the cold, dark, empty house. I flopped into bed, and was nodding off when I heard his breathing. At first, I thought it was me, or maybe the duvet as it rose and fell. I tried to rationalize it every way possible. I was stressed, I was tired, I was imagining it, etc. The breathing was timed with mine, but just a split second behind. It was really weird, but at that point I was more curious than afraid. I stopped my breath to reassure myself that I was going insane, but the other breathing continued. It was undeniable that it was not me. I was so tired and full of grief that I didn't feel the least bit afraid at that point. I was angry, and I shouted, "Shut the F up, I need to sleep." And it breathed once more and then stopped. It was not the end of it, though. My dad came home and I cared for him until he passed away, not 16 months after Mom. In that time, we had all kinds of stuff happening, and my dad always managed to find an explanation until one night the breather paid him a visit too. He still tried to rationalize it, but failed. I had a boyfriend stay over with me one night, and I hadn't told him about the breather. We were just settling down to sleep when it came by the side of the bed, with its raspy, labored, all too familiar old man type breathing. Always timing its inhalations and exhalations with mine. It was bloody strange. I didn't say anything and tried to ignore it when the boyfriend said, "Can you hear that?" So, again, confirming to me that it wasn't all in my imagination or a stress response. I have puzzled over this phenomena for years and never found an answer as to what it was or why it was bothering me. I always wondered if it had a hand in my mother's death. She died in bed, age 54, of no known cause, though they spent 6 weeks trying to find one. She was very susceptible to spirits, and this is where I get it from, and my children too. We've always been pestered by them. Plenty more things happened in that house, and after Dad passed, things got really hairy. But I think I've rambled on for far too long already, so maybe I'll write again another time. Sorry this was so long-winded. I didn't think it made much sense without all the details. I really hope that someone out there can tell me what the heck the breather is, and if it's cursed us, how to break that. Because I do feel at times like I am haunted, and it affects my whole family regardless of where we live. Thank you for reading this, Raven, and for providing a space to share. God bless, and best of wishes for 2024. I've worked in the accounting department for a small, or I guess medium-sized organization for about 5.5 years now. It's been a pretty decent job, in that I have spent a lot of time learning the job, and have definitely put a ton of hours into climbing the corporate ladder and getting into my current position. Though, not without its issues and quirks. The office that I work at, however, actually has a pretty dark history. Back in 1929, during the big stock market crash, the building was actually occupied by a financial firm that lost a ton of money and value. And the possibly true but totally dramatic legend of the building is that the president of said company actually took his life. Supposedly, he went to the roof of the building and jumped. Obviously, none of this can be verified, but I personally believe it. Because something creepy is definitely going on here. And that's actually where the weird stuff starts. I work on the 6th floor, which is the top occupied floor of the building. There is a 7th floor, but it's basically used for the servers and storage more than anything. That said, the 7th floor is also where said president's office was when he worked here. There's an old and honestly kind of rickety elevator that we use to get from floor to floor, and the elevator will seemingly randomly go up to the 7th floor. Almost no one ever has to go up to the 7th floor. So, when I have to use the elevator and it indicates that it's coming down from up there, I always get a bit of a chill. There was actually one point where I was in the elevator going to the 6th floor, and as I was standing there waiting, I watched the light for the 7th floor light up, as if it had been pressed. Thankfully, it stopped at my floor first, so I got off immediately and just moved on. It happens enough that we've all thought that it was maybe a glitch in the elevator or something, but we had some techs come out and look at it, and they've all stated that the elevator is in perfect working order. They've replaced parts to try to get it to stop, but no matter what we do, the 7th floor button will randomly get pressed. So, we just assume that it's something we don't understand and we've accepted it. One night, I was working late due to it being the end of the month, and I had a lot of reports that I needed to finish before the end of the week. I was the only one left on the floor, which isn't terribly uncommon. I was sitting at my desk when I heard a loud thud coming from the direction of the elevator. I walked over to the elevator door and it was open, as if someone had just gotten off on the floor that I was on. I peeked inside and there was no one on it, of course. I kind of looked around to see if I could find anyone that may have been there late, maybe a janitor, but there was nobody. On my way back to my desk, I glanced over at the printer area and I noticed that there was a pack of printer paper that had been knocked over onto the ground. which I'm assuming was the thud that I heard. I went over and collected all the pages and put it back on the table by the printer, and then I went back to my desk. No more than 10 minutes later, I heard that same thud sound. It made me jump and look around again, but it clicked pretty quickly that it was just the paper stack. I got up and walked over toward the printer area to confirm what it was, and as I approached, I watched the elevator doors close on an empty elevator, and saw that the arrows were pointing up, which, again, told me that it was going to the 7th floor. Then, I saw the paper stack, and sure enough, it was knocked over again. I went over and picked it back up, but this time, I put the paper in the cabinet and relocked it just in case. Thankfully, that was the last event that evening, but not the last thing to happen. Some nights, when I would be working late, I would hear footsteps throughout the floor. Footsteps that were definitely not from anyone that was there. I wasn't alone every night, and my coworkers would agree that they heard the footsteps. But the steps were always heavy and loud. Everyone on my team is a woman, and none of us have very heavy steps, so there was no way that these steps were coming from any of us. We would randomly hear voices calling out, usually saying, "Hey," or "Excuse me." But again, it was a rather masculine voice, and there were no men on the floor at the time. We would just ignore the voice, or sometimes would say, "Hello," back to it, and that would be that. Now, all of this was creepy, and is a pretty good indicator that this place is likely haunted by someone, but there was one last thing that happened that I wanted to mention, because it was the height of absolute paranormal terror for me. There was one day where my team was having a bit of a celebration in the 6th floor break room for the CFO's birthday. There was something that we needed to get from up on the 7th floor, from the storage section of the floor, and myself and my direct manager said that we would go up and get it. When we got up there, and we went to get whatever it was that we needed to get, we both paused and listened. This floor is normally pretty silent, minus the small server farm in the back corner. But while we were up there, it was not silent. We were standing there and listening to what we could easily identify as a man sobbing. We looked at each other and thought about whether or not we should look and see if anyone was up there, and we kind of just looked around the storage room for a moment, around the area where it was coming from, and we didn't see anything. As we got to the back, though, we definitely heard the sobbing get louder, and I think we were both kind of freaking out about it. We just grabbed whatever we needed and headed back down. My manager mentioned it to the CFO, and she laughed about it, saying that we weren't the first people to mention that they'd heard crying upstairs. She then mentioned that she firmly believes it's the spirit of that company's president, and that because of his actions, he's forever stuck in this building and cannot move on. I will say that I wasn't expected to hear the CFO start talking about paranormal stuff, or the building being haunted, but it was nice to know that we at least weren't crazy. I try not to work late much anymore, mostly because I don't like dealing with the creepiness, but my coworkers have mentioned that they've experienced similar things. So, at least I know that it hasn't stopped. I hope that someday his spirit does find peace, but based on what she said, I think that it's pretty likely that he'll forever be stuck there. When I was a kid, we had a lovely backyard with a full garden that we actually didn't build. It was all built by the previous homeowner, who had supposedly passed away in the house. My parents kept it all intact. They never really did anything extra with it. They just left what the previous owner had planted and just let it do what it naturally did. It was actually quite pretty, and even being left to its own devices, it would end up being the loveliest little flower bed. To add to this, the previous owner had installed a clothesline around the flower bed, and my mom was old-fashioned, so she believed that sun-dried clothing smelled fresher and felt crisper. One day she asked me to go hang the laundry outside. Normally, this was a chore, but I didn't really mind it. It was almost meditative, so I kind of enjoyed it. But on this day, for some reason, when I stepped outside with the basket of damp clothing, I stopped. I don't mean that I just stopped walking. I mean that I literally froze, unable to move. I got hit with this intense fear, this strange and paralyzing feeling of unease. It was overwhelming. So overwhelming that I almost started to feel like I was going to cry. I tried to keep going, I tried to take a step forward, but I literally couldn't. I was trying to think logically, looking around for a person in the yard that was maybe watching me, thinking about whether or not I'd watched a scary movie or read something that had me in an anxiety attack. Look, I was like 12, so I was just trying to piece together why I was feeling like I was freaking out in the backyard that I had spent countless hours in. At some point, my mother must have realized that I was acting strangely, and just standing there in the yard and staring at nothing in particular, when she had asked me to take care of the laundry. I heard the back door open, and I heard her stepping toward me, and then heard her say, "Hey, Melody, what's wrong? Why are you..." Then she just stopped when she got next to me. I glanced over at her, and I watched as the color drained from her face and her eyes got wide. She felt it too. I remember just looking at the garden, looking for whatever it was that was causing this and asking, "What's going on, Mom?" To which she said, "I don't know. Let's go back inside." She grabbed my arm and pulled me back into the house. We got back inside, and she just stood there staring at that flower bed, looking terrified. I asked her if there was something out there, and she just shook her head, saying that she didn't know. I asked her if she felt what I felt, and she told me that she felt something, but she didn't know what it was. She ended up just throwing the clothes in the dryer, and we didn't talk about it after that. She didn't even mention it to my dad. So, what the hell was that? We never spoke about it at all after that day, but I've obviously never forgotten it. My mom didn't hang the clothing on the line for a couple of months after this, and I think that whatever that feeling was the reason. I know that there was nothing physical there. It wasn't like a creep in our yard or some kind of animal or something. It was just our normal backyard, complete with the pretty flowers in the back, so why were we so freaked out? In the end, I'm chalking this up to something paranormal, because it was not normal. I don't know if it was some spirit in the garden or some weird messed up shared hallucination, but it was horrifying, and definitely something beyond our understanding. I live a little ways out in the woods, on a small dirt road with a few neighbors, who also live on our small street. It's a quiet place. We all know each other and get along decently. Given that we host little bonfires sometimes, and invite the neighbors around to grill and have a few drinks, we often discuss things that we've seen lately in our little patch of forest. A group of lovely deer, a mischievous raccoon, or the odd wandering bear often are topics of conversation. However, inevitably we often end up on the subject of a mutual experience that most of us have had, with unexplainable phenomena happening around our homes. It's no secret that my woods tend to make people a bit uneasy. It's dark, it's quiet, and that tends to make people tense. I'm definitely no different. I don't go outside at dark if I don't have to, and I get spooked at times when an animal makes a ruckus. There are some things, though, that I just can't attribute to animals. To start, I have to go all the way back to when I was 13, when I first moved onto this property. I often felt watched at night. I was terrified to sleep without the lights on. I tried my best to ignore it, but I was honestly terrified to be outside at night or be here alone. For my 14th birthday, I decided to face my fears so I could pitch a tent outside and camp in the yard with a few good friends. One of them left in the middle of the night because they were so anxious. Another left early in the morning after barely sleeping at all. The last friend stayed a couple extra days, but was creeped out the entire time. She claimed to have briefly seen an apparition of a pale woman with dark hair standing in our yard, and felt something touch her at night. She was truly terrified, and I could tell. When I tapped her shoulder, she startled very easily, and almost hit me out of fright. This was very abnormal for her. I spoke to my uncle who lives next door about the woman she saw, and to my surprise, he claimed to have also seen the same apparition multiple times. He wasn't even surprised when I brought it up. I moved out not long after this, but recently moved back. Since returning as an adult, I've heard several stories from my family and neighbors about weird phenomena like this. My uncle has seen the lady, but also shadow figures, and heard some unnatural noises coming from the woods at night. As a man who has lived out here for 40 years, he's very familiar with the usual sounds of animals and nature, and he didn't think these sounds were natural. His wife has also seen shadow figures and weird masses of black energy. She claimed to have been pushed over by an unseen force after witnessing one of these black masses of energy. She has never gone outside at night since. My grandmother claimed to have been chased by a shadow entity several years ago on this property while walking back from my uncle's. It stopped at her front door and watched her while she cried and called my aunt and uncle for help. Understandably, they said nope and told her to light some sage. A couple neighbors have claimed to have seen similar shadow figures, as well as the apparition of the lady on occasion. I still feel watched, and I regularly cleanse my house to keep whatever it is out there as far from my home as possible. A good friend of mine, when I first moved back in, called me with concerns over a dream that she had. This was before she had ever seen or set foot on my property. She described my house and property perfectly, and described seeing the same pale woman that multiple people now have seen. I was understandably shaken, considering she'd not once been to my home at the time, and I hadn't really discussed the weird happenings with her. She spent the night one time and refuses to do it again. My street is super creepy, and I have come to accept that something more is here. With all the shared experiences, I can't deny that something is out there. It's been here a long time, and it seems to make itself known to anyone who spends enough time out here. Hi, Raven. I hope that you share my story. Everyone thinks it was just a dream, but I was awake at the time. My parents were renting an old house from the 50s. I had my first room upstairs next to my parents'. Unfortunately, I moved later to the basement, which was also an active place, of course. I'm 19 years old in my room, on my airbed reading R.L. Stine book called The Room. I even remember the cover's picture. It was about a ghost trapped in an upstairs attic room, which was sealed shut tight. The spirit wandered out of the room and would act friendly to the main character in the hopes of coaxing them to open the sealed door. Eventually, the ghost in the story got her way and was released. The ghost ended up evil and tried to kill the main character in the book. I finished the book that night. I looked at the clock, and it was 3 a.m. Yikes. I'd best get to sleep. My parents hated it when I would stay up super late and would hassle me, so I put my head down instantly. I was still awake and feeling like I was going to fall asleep soon, but my skin tingled, and the hair on the back of my neck went straight up, and I shot up right from my airbed. Something wasn't right. My vision was fuzzy from it being dark in my room, but I saw distinctively a swirling black smoke enter my room from the ajar door. It was seconds of seeing it, and I put my head down again on my pillow trying to pretend I was asleep. I did that a lot during my childhood years. I have many stories, but this one was the worst yet. This was different, and I knew it instantly. I never felt such a presence of pure evil before, and it's the most terrifying thing I ever felt. It was ancient. I can't describe it with words. The swirling smoke was the darkest and blackest thing I have ever seen. It reminded me of something as black and dark from the black sky at night, but blacker still. The smoke was something truly evil. When people speak about evil, it's superficial. However, this thing was a real source of evil. The fear was pure, and the ice-cold feeling went up and down my spine. I never felt such powerful evil and terror. This thing I knew was here because I allowed it somehow. Maybe it was the book that I had finished reading. I opened a portal of something that shouldn't exist in this world. This thing swirled around me entirely while I laid on my airbed. Instantly, I couldn't breathe. My breath was no more. I could not breathe, but I dared not move. I'm not kidding when I said I felt pure evil and terror. This thing was evil. It exists. So I wouldn't move. I was terrified beyond comprehension. However, it was trying to kill me. I felt the airbed shift from my weight, and I felt myself slowly raising from my airbed. I was levitating longitude/horizontal. I remember feeling frozen in place. I only had my thoughts. I couldn't fight back with movement. I could not speak or make any sound to alarm my parents. I called in my thoughts to my mother. Mom. But nothing. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. An evil surrounded me as thick as oil. Then I knew who to call next. It's a power that is purely good. True light and pure light. I put all my love and trust into the universe and screamed in my head, God. I felt a protective shield wash over me, and I felt myself being slowly lowered back onto my airbed. It squeaked and shifted from my weight, and I could breathe again. It was gone. The evil had left.